We're on.
We are on. Marko jumped the gun on me there. So, yes, I'm here with Marko. Now, how would I pronounce the surname correctly?
In Macedonian, Papuckovski. In English, Papuckovski.
Okay, Papuckovski. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I realized it was Macedonian because all the Macedonians have the ski on the end of their name, right?
Yes, but with a V, whereas the Polish have it with a W. So they have skis as well, but for them it's a W.
Okay.
Whereas with us it's a V-S-K-I. For them it's usually a W-S-K-I.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So how Marko and I met each other. So you've been coming into Integrated Combat Center as well.
Yep.
To do some rolling and things like that. But you're a black belt under the Roots gyms. Or?
Yeah, I'm a black belt under Robert Namoski.
Okay, Robert Namoski. Yeah. So, like you were thinking to reach out and do some podcasts, and I'm here and I do podcasts, and so I was like, okay, well, let's connect.
Worked out well.
Yeah, let's put it together and let's see where this conversation goes. But I did a little bit of homework and I just had a look at your website and things like that, and I thought it was pretty interesting that you're doing this thing that's about wellness.
Yep.
Right, and so perhaps let's start with that and let's talk a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, sure. Yep. So that all started through Jiu Jitsu, believe it or not. Okay. So it was kind of my own personal health issues that I was going through while I was trying to compete and fight in MMA and do all these things. And a lot of jiu-jitsu guys are familiar with staph infections.
Yep.
I started to get them chronically, like every 2 to 3 months for about a 2-year period.
Yep.
I would get staph infections. At the time I was working a full-time kind of sales job and traveling quite a bit, competing in jiu-jitsu, training for MMA fights, doing kickboxing, and I was always sick. And I was like, man, like what's going on here? Like this isn't right. So I would go to the doctors and, you know, they would pretty much just say, you're fine. It's just staph. It's on the surface of the skin. So just take an antibiotic. And I used to even have a friend who's a pharmacist just get me antibiotics without scripts because that's how often it would happen.
So is that just like a amoxicillin or like one of those generics? Keflex.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yep.
So, but prior to that, like growing up as a kid, I always had psoriasis and I always had sinusitis, like problems breathing. So I had these issues chronically, but never really understood why. Went to dermatologist, did a bunch of things. And then the staph infections is when it really got out of hand. And then from the chronic antibiotic use, I started to get IBS. Like I was having diarrhea like 10 to 12 times a day, you know? So I'm trying to train, trying to compete, trying to cut weight, trying to work, and I've got all these issues going on. And at the time I had a friend, I was going to all these conferences for integrative health, and I met a practitioner who trained jiu-jitsu and I worked with him. So I did functional testing, I changed my diet, I focused a lot on diet and supplementation through about a 2-year period. And completely got rid of all of those problems. Like I haven't had staph in years. I haven't had psoriasis in years. I haven't had IBS in years. And that's pretty much what we do now. So the idea for the business was, how do we upload an integrative health clinic online and make it accessible to people who otherwise can't find these practitioners? So, you know, we've got customers in Saskatchewan, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, US, and they don't have access to these type of therapies, but they do now. So that's essentially what the business is, and it's been really cool. It's been fun. Yeah.
Isn't it interesting? Because I think, you know, most people when they get like a skin condition, whether it's staph or ringworm, I think that one's pretty prevalent at the present moment. Yeah. But a lot of the times we look to the exterior and we go, oh, it's a skin condition.
Yep.
So we smash it with antifungals and we do all that sort of stuff to address those things. But then we don't really think about that. There's a whole microbiome on our skin.
Correct.
That, you know, the things we come in contact. Yes, that is one thing, but we're probably, you know, I think staph exists on our skin normally anyway.
Yep.
And it exists in your nose and all these different other places. But it's only when your body can't, you know, address these problems that you then get an infection and you get something where it's out of balance or whatever. And I think, you know, when we talk about the microbiome, like it's fairly common for people to understand, you know, it's a good idea to have things that are probiotic or prebiotic, you know, whether it's yogurts and all these sorts of things that are good for your gut. But we don't really think about, you know, how that could impact our skin health and all of these other conditions.
Absolutely.
When you said you had psoriasis, so psoriasis is typically where it's like dry skin.
Dry, flaky skin, sometimes itchy.
Yep. Did you have that like all over your body, or was it just like in patches around your neck, like knuckles and things like that? Or?
For me, it was mostly my torso. So I would have it from like under my armpits, kind of where I would sweat a lot.
Yep.
Behind my ears, my eyelids.
Yep.
Yeah. It was all the little cracks and and dry places, really.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, so when how did you start this business? Like, I guess, I'm just curious. So you said you did all the testing and you sort of treated your own conditions.
Yep.
It's a pretty big step to then go from there to then
starting a business.
Yeah.
So at the time I was actually living in Canada. So
okay.
I'd moved to Montreal to train at Tristar Gym.
Yep.
And I was there for a couple of years. Like I was there for 2 years. And I was still working with this practitioner remotely. Like I was in Canada, he was in Australia, and I was doing Zoom appointments. Any test that needed to be done, he would send it to me via mail. And we became really good friends. And then obviously supplements and things like that were all sent to me. And at the time I was also helping fighters cut weight. Like there was a few guys at TriStar that were like, hey, you're a nutritionist. Can you help me cut weight? I was like, yeah, sure. So I would put together a package for them and I would guide them through the process. And then one of the guys at TriStar reached out about his wife. He said, hey, my wife's struggling with this autoimmune condition. Can you help her? And I thought, well, yeah, I can. I've got a couple of tests, but they do have to come from Australia. Is it okay if we ship it to you? He's like, yep. And so we did that and we treated her. And like a few weeks later, I had a friend send us a referral. It was a Australian guy living in South America, a former SAS guy, who was going through a lot of health issues, and we did the same thing with him. I said, well, I'll just send you the testing and we'll do it remotely.
Yep.
And then it just grew from there. I was like, well, there's actually something here because we're not dentists. We don't have to be in person. We're not chiropractors. We don't have to do adjustments. Everything we do is consultation.
Yep.
And you implement the strategies yourself. Like you eat the different diet. We send you the supplements. So then we put it together as a package, and I thought, well, let's put together a specific package for IBS and IBD, a specific package for thyroid, a specific one for skin, and we know exactly what tests we need to run, and so we can make it faster and more efficient and get people better within a 3-month period as opposed to taking 2 to 3 years.
Yep. Okay.
So
yeah. There's a few things that I want to sort of touch on about that. So the first thing, I guess, TriStar. So you went to train with Fierce?
For us, yeah.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about that. So for those people that don't know, for us, Zahabi is the head coach over at TriStar. Was one of the head, obviously trained GSP.
Yep.
And so what I wanted to touch on about the TriStar journey was what made you decide, hey, I'm going to pack up and go to Canada and into the cold.
Yeah, it was cold.
Yep.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah. And yeah. So what made you decide to do that? And then the second part of the question is, I'm a bit curious about the whole system that you've sort of got. So like, if people were interested in this, like what do they do? Like how does it work? Like what how do they get in contact? And then what are the tests and what do they show and all that sort of stuff? So the TriStar thing first, and then
okay.
Yeah.
So TriStar was always a dream of mine. Like I grew up watching MMA. And one of my favorite fighters was George.
Yep.
And there was one specific countdown episode.
Yep.
Back in the day, I think it was called Primetime back then. I don't think it was called Countdown.
Yeah.
But I think it was George fighting Dan Hardy, and they did a countdown, and they went to TriStar. And I just remember like the video, the camera panning to the windows with the 3 stars on the on the window, and I was like, wow, that's fucking cool. Like I really want to go there. And I was studying at the University of Wollongong, and the University of Wollongong had an exchange program with Concordia University in Montreal. So I was like, I'm going to do an exchange and train there and study there for a semester. Like that was kind of my thing. And then I was 21 at the time, and mum got sick. Mum got diagnosed with breast cancer, and that I was like, I'm not leaving. I'll stay here. And then I graduated university, started working, and one day one of the guys from the gym, Steven, we were just training, and I was like, hey man, do you want to go to TriStar with me for a few weeks? He's like, yeah. Like, sweet. And so we just booked it, and we went for about 5 weeks.
Okay.
And we lived in the TriStar dorms. We trained for 5 weeks, 2 to 3 times a day. Like you just walk from the dorms to the gym.
Yep.
Right. And I remember like the first day we went to the gym, I'm looking for it. I'm like, where is this place? And it's in an industrial area in Montreal. It's not a nice spot. And I looked up and I saw the window, and I was like, wow, I'm like, fuck, I'm here.
Yeah, that's the place.
Walked in, saw Faraz, and I was like, hey Faraz, and then George walked in, and then Rory McDonald walked in, and then I was like, wow, like I can't believe I'm in the same room, right?
Yeah.
And that was really cool, and we got really close with Faraz. Like the way he's a great coach. the more you turn up, the more attention he pays to you. Right. And so if you're there, you'll get treated really well. If you come every now and again, he kind of just forgets about you. And so we turned up like every day, twice a day. He saw us all the time. And then later that year, we came back to Sydney, and later that year, there was a UFC in Sydney, and Elias Theodoru fought. And rest in peace to Elias. He passed away tragically last year. But Elias fought, and he came over and he trained with us at Roots, and we became really good buddies. And Faraz came and taught a seminar, and all these things happened. And then I continued living my life in Sydney, and I thought, man, I really want to go back. And I wasn't happy. I wasn't satisfied with my job. I was young. I really wanted to fight. And I was like, that's the place I need to be. Like, because to come from, and no disrespect to any of the gyms in Australia, like there's amazing, but to be in a place like Tristar, where every day is a seminar, like there were so many people you could train with, so many great coaches. It's just, we don't really have that here in one place. And it was, when I came back, I was a bit disheartened. I was like, I'm looking for the same level of training, but I can't find it anywhere. So I'm just going to move. Like I sold everything I owned. I quit my job, took my savings, and I moved to Montreal, and I messaged one of my friends. I'm like, hey, do you have a room for me somewhere with anyone? And that was it. And I just went back and stayed there for about 18 months and trained every day. And yeah, that's the story really of how I got there.
Okay. We'll come back to that story because I want to know what was some of the reasons why you came back. But let's talk a little bit about what is the process. So let's say somebody's got one of these conditions, whether it's IBS or whatever the case may be. So I'm guessing obviously they go to the website, they fill in their details.
Correct.
And what happens from there?
Either me or one of the practitioners will call them, and we will book in. Usually we book in about a 45-minute Zoom call entirely free. And it's kind of like a screening appointment where we want to see some of the blood tests you've already done. We want to get a history of what you've done, what you're struggling with, and that way we can build a package for you. We only work in packages because I don't want to do one-off appointments. It's not good for anyone. It's not good for us. It's not good for the patient because they rarely get results that way. So with us, it's you commit to a package and you pay for it either upfront or in payments.
Installments, But
we have you for we know we have you for 3 months.
Okay.
So we know that we can actually get some great work done with you. So it's commitment free. Like the first appointment's obviously entirely free. And to be quite honest, we only have the capacity at the moment to take on about 10 patients a month.
Okay.
There's 2 practitioners and 1 support person. We're bringing on another practitioner, another 2 potentially next month. So we'll open up more space. But the level of attention that each patient gets is really high. So we can't bring on 20, 30. It's not a very scalable business model, but I like it because we can make a huge impact on people. So when I was thinking about it, I'm like, do I, for example, create a supplement and have a small impact on thousands of people, or do I create a program and have a really, significant impact on less people? And I went for option 2. So they can fill out a form, and there's like links everywhere. There's humanliwellness.com. You can find me on Instagram, follow the links, send me a message, and I'll personally reach out to you.
It's always interesting because I sort of liken it to, excuse me, to like when you go to the gym, like a lot of people sign up for the gym, right? And then most gyms will give you like 1 free PT or something like that when you first sign up to the gym to make sure that you don't go and injure yourself, or you're getting a bit of an idea of what to do. But the amount of people that then just go and try and do their own training and work it out themselves is probably, I would say it's probably majority of people that do that. At least in Australia, that's the sort of culture that we've got here. But then there are some people that will then go all in and invest in a PT and they'll get tremendous results as a result of that. So I sort of view that as almost likening it to do you create a supplement that you then try and mass market, and you might have a small impact on a significant amount of people because you can obviously touch more people with that, or do you offer that personalized service and then just cut down your numbers in terms of just focusing on the people that really need the help and trying to make an impactful difference. So there's no right or wrong. Like they're both very valid business models. But it's interesting that you chose that pathway because I think that allows you to form better connections with the people that you're dealing with. You also can develop a bit of a history, so you actually understand what's their history and all that sort of stuff. And therefore the advice that you're getting is obviously very tailored to their specific issues. Correct?
Absolutely.
So when it comes to the testing, like what, out of curiosity, what kind of testing do you do? Is it bloods? Is it urine? Is it hair follicles? Like what is it?
Yeah, so look, we have access to all the tests. We have like 52 different functional tests we can run depending on what the patient presents with. But the most popular ones that we use, the most common ones, are a 3-day stool test that we do. And we do it through a lab called Doctors Data in the US. So you will, for example, you come to us with IBS, we send you a stool test. You do it on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You provide 3 separate samples over 3 separate days, and he gets picked up from your home by a courier. And he gets shipped over to the US in a ice pack to keep the samples viable and all of that stuff. And about 2 to 3 weeks later, we get a report, and the report's about 20 pages long.
Wow!
And it has everything from infections, Clostridia, Klebsiella, full microbiome profile, any parasites, any viruses, any autoimmune like secretory IgA or white blood cells or red blood cells. We can see absolutely everything that's going on with your gut. And from there, we design a protocol. And that can include supplements. It usually includes supplements, dietary changes, sometimes medication, very rarely. But if we do see a significant, for example, Clostridia infection, we will recommend going to your doctor, taking the results and maybe getting antibiotics. But that's only happened a handful of times out of hundreds of patients. So that's one of the tests that we run. The other one that's really popular that I just did for myself is a hormone and neurotransmitter test. So if someone presents with more chronic fatigue, generally the type of people who put a lot of load on themselves, entrepreneurs, athletes, people that are pushing, striving towards something tend to be more tired. So this is a full hormone profile. So cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, progesterone, estrogen, and your neurotransmitters. So serotonin, dopamine, GABA. How is your brain adjusting to the load? What's your circadian rhythm like? What's your endocrine system doing? And that's a urine test. So you do that again over 2 days. You'd give urine sample at 5 p.m., 10 p.m. if you wake up during the night because you're not supposed to. First thing in the morning and 2 hours later. So we get a 24-hour snapshot of how you cope with your day. And we want you normally to do it on a work day. Like don't do it on a Sunday. Pick Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the days where your regular representation of what you do. And that's where we take that. So with that, we have a lot of information as well.
Yeah, because that's going to tell you. So if somebody's, during their workday, what's happened during their workday. And then that's interesting because, like normally with these tests, right, they're only snapshots of certain things that happen, even blood tests, right? Like if you get your testosterone levels checked from a blood test, well, what did you do that day? If you've done a hard workout, your test levels might be low. And it's not really indicative of the true situation because it's a snapshot post exercise or post whatever you've done that day, or if you've done nothing. Right.
Correct.
So when it comes to, and I'm sort of interested here, when it comes to antibiotics and things like that, if you had, and this is not advice, people. So I'm just curious because like I have this sort of perspective that me personally, I try and avoid antibiotics. For that reason, because they're not selective in terms of what they address.
Correct.
And if I'm wrong about that, please feel free to call me out. But I don't believe that they're selective about what they address. It's like almost like using antibacterial soap for everything. If you were to wash your body every day with antibacterial soap, I don't think that's actually probably good for your skin. And long term, those things, then you might have more issues with certain, whether it's, like candida or, these funguses or ringworm and these sorts of things, because, you're stripping away your body's natural defenses, so to speak. Is that right? Or?
Yeah, pretty much. So it's not the use of antibiotics that's the problem, it's the overuse of them. It's often the first thing people go to. But antibiotics are great. Like they've kept us alive. But the more you use them, the more resistant bacteria become to them. This is where you get multiple resistant staph infections and antibiotics don't work anymore. We can actually see in the test which antibiotics you are susceptible to and which ones your particular infection is resistant to.
Oh, wow.
So if we were to prescribe one, we would pick the one that you're susceptible to. And the problem, what happens is when you take them and you lower the overall bacteria in your gut, you just create more room for pathogenic bacteria to grow. So it's called a colonization resistance. You will lower the colonization resistance. So we want to have diversity we just don't want overgrowth. We want to have bad bacteria. We just don't want too much of it.
Yep.
We want to have all of it.
Yep.
We don't want to have too little because then we have enough. We've got room for things to grow.
Yep.
And pathogenic bacteria will grow, and things that will promote the growth of pathogenic bacteria are, well, one, constantly being exposed to it. So if you're in a jiu-jitsu gym, you're almost always constantly being exposed to yeast and fungus and stuff like that. And then also diet. So sugar plays a huge role. Like they grow off sugar. If you've ever tried to make homemade kombucha, the way you grow the SCOBY is by adding sugar.
Yep.
So this is the same way that bacteria grows inside of you.
Yep.
So our antibiotics are good for intermittent use every now and again. If you have a staph infection, take them. Yep. But we need to also look at the long term. How are we going to help you recover from this?
Yep.
And microbiome is super important. Like it's having a robust gut and having a normal bowel movement that and good nutrient assimilation. It's the foundation of health.
So then when it comes to like people love talking about the carnivore diet. That's probably like the most in thing at the present moment.
Yeah.
What from your experience, like what do you? Well, I guess from a personal level, like how do you eat? Like what are the things that you sort of take into consideration with your own diet? And then again, this is only speaking generally, right? Like everybody's got a different perspective based on. And I think one of the things that I'm actually curious about is like there's this idea about blood types that influence your body's ability to process certain foods and things like that. So they call that the blood type diet. But I think going a step further than that, like I think you can actually do genetic testing now to identify what foods you probably are better for you and not.
We run that as well, epigenetic testing.
Yeah.
Blood type diet, I'm not so much a fan of. Carnivore. So I actually did a podcast with Sean Baker, and I have done carnivore myself, and it worked really well for me. I actually felt really good on it. The thing with carnivore that I guess people don't really understand is like the people who are on carnivore diets don't want to be on carnivore diets. They do it because they have no other choice. You listen to Michaela Peterson, she's like, it's not fun eating just lamb every day, but if I don't eat it, my rheumatoid arthritis flares up. So for people with severe autoimmune conditions, it makes a lot of sense because what you're doing is you're removing. I have one patient, he's a 36-year-old guy, used to fight full contact karate athlete, and then got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And he went gluten-free and then dairy-free and then lectin-free and eventually carnivore.
Wow. And
that's when he felt his best. But now he eats kind of like a modified version of that. So the carnivore diet makes a lot of sense for people with autoimmune. Much more sense than a vegan diet.
Okay.
But no one wants to eat just meat all day.
Yeah.
So if you don't have to go that extreme, then don't. But if you are struggling with things like MS and arthritis and it's been years, it will help you. Like it really will, because you're removing processed foods, you're removing wheat, you're removing dairy, you're removing lectins, you're removing anything that your immune system could potentially respond poorly to, and you're just eating meat. And so of course it will work. But it's not something that I see sustainable long term.
Of course.
I eat closer towards a carnivore diet. I eat paleo, high protein, mostly low carb, pretty sensible. Every now and again, like on a Sunday, I might have like a homemade gluten-free pizza or something like that. But for the most part, it's a high protein diet. Like it's in the morning, I'll have eggs, maybe a piece of sourdough or gluten-free sourdough or something like that. Lunchtime's usually salmon or protein or something, and then dinner's usually red meat or slow cooked meats. That's simple.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people, everybody wants the silver bullet. They just want, just tell me what I need to eat, or tell me what I need to do to achieve X, Y, Z.
Yeah,
right.
The secret is what you don't eat.
Is what you don't eat.
Yeah, it's not what you eat. Everyone always asks me, like, what do I eat for this? I'm like, it's not what you eat. You don't add a superfood. You cut out all the shit. The solution is by eliminating the junk. It's not what you eat. It's what you don't eat.
That's actually a really good way to look at it, because I think, if you actually were to look at how much sugar you have in your diet, you probably got more than you think. If you have an orange juice, or you have anything that's not water, essentially, chances are it's got some form of sugar in it.
Correct.
Unless you're trying to take these like the non-sugar alternatives like stevia and or aspartame. That's probably even worse. Or aspartame. I don't know how you pronounce
aspartame.
Aspartame, aspartame. I don't know, something like
that. Close enough.
Close enough. So Okay, let's wind it back a little bit because I want to try and understand a little bit more about what life was like for you growing up.
Yep.
So, were you born in Australia or
No, I was born in Macedonia.
in Macedonia?
Yeah.
Okay, and so what age did you come over?
I was 9.
Oh, you were 9.
8 years old, turning 9. Yeah.
Okay, so you'd actually have some pretty decent memories of your time in Macedonia. Can you describe what Macedonia was like back then?
Man, it's so different. Like I'm really grateful for the way that I grew up because it gave me a lot of perspective, and I feel fortunate that I'm in Sydney and I have an apartment to live in and things, because it's a very different world out there. Like sometimes we feel very sheltered. I find people in Australia and Canada and the Western countries forget that there's a world outside of the Western countries, and it operates entirely differently to what we're used to here.
Yep.
So growing up for me, like we didn't have much money. Mum was a hairdresser. Dad used to be a bodyguard actually in Macedonia, and we lived in a very small house with not much of a kitchen, very old bathroom. The thing I'm grateful for is that I grew up very social. Like you don't have iPads, you don't have things like that. You play on the street.
Yep.
So I was always with my friends, always at school, hanging out with the neighbors, doing things like that. We had down the road from us, a gypsy kid who lived in a shack. Like I just got to see everything, right? And played a lot of soccer, played a lot of basketball, got in a lot of fights. That's where I started martial arts. I started with karate when I was about 5 years old.
Yep.
So it was I'm really grateful for the way that I grew up because I'm very social. And you can kind of like put me in any situation I found, and I can figure it out. I can talk to people, I can find my way. And I think that's just from being really socialized as a young kid.
Did you have any siblings?
I have a younger sister who's 11 years younger than me. She was born here in Australia.
Wow, 11 years.
Yeah.
So that's a significant age gap, I guess.
Yep.
And just to digress for a second, but when she came into the picture, how did you feel? Were you like, oh,
felt good.
Yeah.
Like it took my parents a while to settle into Australia and be financially okay to have another child.
Yep.
But I felt great, man. It was like ended up the way my dad raised me was like I had a lot of responsibility from a young kid. So when she was born, I was 11, and he was like, okay, now you need to babysit and take care of her and treat her almost like your daughter. So it was a lot of responsibility, which is pros and cons to that. But I love her. She's awesome.
Yeah.
She's great.
Okay. So then, coming to Australia when you're 8 or 9, that would mean that you obviously started your schooling in Macedonia.
Yeah.
What's the schooling like over there? Like, I don't know if you remember much, but can you share some insights into, I guess, what was school like, for
Strict.
you? Strict.
Yeah, like you've got homework every day. It's always math. Like a lot of math is in the early, like you memorize your times table.
Yep.
So when I came here, I was actually like quite ahead in maths, but then I had to stop that and learn English, and it kind of balanced out. But the school there is like, if I could paint a picture of it, Macedonia was communism, right? Yugoslavia was a communist country. So if you've ever seen those movies of like Russia and the grey buildings and the like concrete walls, like that was a school. The chairs were like wood chairs, like they weren't comfortable. You each had a dedicated like desk. You're not sitting with friends, you're sitting on your own. If you get in trouble, you go in the corner and you sharpen pencils for an hour. And like if the parent comes to talk to the teacher, they're allies. Like if the teacher says your son wasn't good because of X, Y, and Z, the parents listen and they discipline you. Whereas here I find that it's a bit different. The toilets were like those toilets that you squat down on.
Hole in the ground.
Yeah, hole in the ground basically. So it was a very different schooling. But the people that come out of those schools are very intelligent. Like because they get grilled with STEM subjects like science, tech, engineering, math.
Yep.
So they come out very well educated, but there's not much opportunity. And so they leave usually to other countries. They go to Bulgaria or the EU or Sweden and try to find work there. But they're very, like my cousin's very bright. He was doing like year 12 physics in year 8. So it's different. But that's what I remember from the schools there.
And then as a kid, how would you describe yourself? Like, I guess, what were your teachers have said about you? Were you one of the good students, or were you one of the ones in the corner sharpening the pencils?
I was very timid. I remember I was very like quiet, timid. I never really got into trouble. Mostly because I was just like scared of my dad. I was like, I don't want to get into trouble, but I was a pretty quiet kid. Yeah.
So was your dad pretty strict at home?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's strict.
Would he, belt you with like use a belt or stick or?
No, never.
No,
like
never.
He's never hit me with, he's hit me like once maybe. but I probably deserved it. But nothing like no crazy out of control. It was just the way that he was very principled. And if he, for example, I remember lying to him about going to a party once and with my cousin, but I wasn't with him. And he called me. He's like, hey, where's, and I ended up having to stay up that night because he had work in the morning. He's like, well, I've got work in the morning and you wanted to be out all night. So now what you're going to do is you're going to stay up and I'm going to go to sleep. And that's how he would discipline me. He would kind of put me in the situation to understand it, like, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But it was never like abusive or anything like that. He was just very principled.
Yeah.
You know, certain things, like I listened to bring up the subject, but like Andrew Tate, for example, right? This big controversial figure. Yeah. Some of the things he says, I'm like, my dad's been saying that to me for years. Like, even like little things. I went to dinner over their place the other night and he always sits on like a particular chair. And Jess was like, why do you sit on that chair? He's like, well, because my back's on the wall and I've just always been taught to sit that way.
Yeah.
Or, you know, table manners, like let women eat first, then the eldest, and then you get your food. Like all these little things that were grilled into me as like a little kid.
Yeah.
Now they're subconscious, but they're kind of counterculture. Yeah. Now, you know, it's not normal for everyone to think that way.
Yeah. Well, so I think it's because of the upbringing that you have, like you absorb everything that's around you, right?
Yeah.
And so when you see like that, this is the way things are done, you naturally just sort of fit into that mold. Yeah. And it's only as you get older, then you start to look at it and you go, I wonder why I do that. Or, you know, and then you start to think about it. And then you got to wonder, you know, and a lot of people probably don't spend the time to think about, you know, is it positive? Is it negative? But at the end of the day, you know, when you come over to a different country, then, you know, you sort of then, it becomes a bit of a blend, right? Like you have these ideas that come from Macedonia, but then you also look at Australian society and then you go, okay, well, these are the things that we do here in Australia. And you're trying to navigate, you know, how to put it all together. Yeah. And so even like for me, I wasn't born overseas. I actually was born in Australia, but I have this whole Chinese heritage behind me. Yeah. So a lot of the things and the way that I'd view the world would be through those lenses, because these are lenses that your parents put on you when you're young. You know, you don't view them as lenses. You just go, oh, okay, this is the way we do things. Yeah. But, you know, we're doing things because that was obviously what was instilled in them as well. Yeah. And then it's like, you know, when you, and when you're young, like that's when you really try and, at least for me anyway, that's like, you know, when you try and challenge some of these things, like you're trying to establish boundaries, you're trying to establish, okay, what can you get away with? What can't you get away with? Exactly. Yeah. Right. And so you step out of line and you get disciplined or whatever the case may be. Yeah. And then you got to work out, okay, if I don't want to get disciplined, what should I do? Yeah. Yeah. There's pros and cons to both. Like there's a lot of things that I've taken from that culture and gone, I really like that. And I'd like to instill that in my children someday. And there's a lot of things from Western culture where I go, I really like that too. And I want to instill that. Like there's much more tolerance I find in Western culture. Like they'll tend to tolerate different people, different classes, different preferences. Whereas in Eastern Europe and maybe even China, it's like this is what we tolerate and this is what we don't like. And there's no grey. Yeah. So because I'm going through this with my son at the moment, right? Like how do you teach a child resilience? Right. Yeah. And it sounds like for some people they go, well, what are you trying to teach your child resilience for? He's like 4 at the moment. Yep. But it's like, if he gets into this mindset where like I was when I was 5, that I could just like, you know, cry and get away with anything. How long, like, and look, I guess the caveat to that is that I turned out okay. Yep. But I had a very different set of circumstances as I got older because, you know, like I don't hope that, you know, my son has to go through the same things that I did, but you know, my parents had their issues from a marriage perspective, but then my mum also had some mental health issues. Yep. And that, you know, then forced me to grow up quite quickly. Yep. You know, and then the age gap between me and my brother was 7 years. I got an older brother who's 7 years older than me. So in those years, like of late high school, my brother was overseas. So essentially I was on my own, you know, trying to navigate all of these issues that my parents were having and my mum was having. And, you know, from that perspective, I feel like I matured very quickly. And, you know, like I'm always been quite extroverted, but I withdrew into myself quite a bit from that perspective to just focus on, I guess, the most important things. And so, you know, I feel like when you think about, you know, motivation, right, there's only really 2 key motivators in life. One's pain and one's pleasure. You either do things because they feel good or you do things because you are you're worried about the negative consequences of not doing them. Yeah. Right. So, you know, you can sort of instill resilience into a child by you know, letting them know that the alternative to not doing something is pain. Yeah. Right. is that the right thing to do? Probably not. Like, you know, you shouldn't be beating the shit out of your kids, right? But on the flip side, like if they never work that muscle of resilience, so, you know, to I guess give you an analogy with the progress in terms of like the mindset for learning and things like that with relation to STEM, you know, because you're in that schooling system where everybody's doing the same thing, you're forced to do it, right? Because that's what everybody is doing, right? If somebody's opting out of that process, then they're probably the minority, because majority of the kids are all just, okay, we've got to learn this, You don't question it.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things that I think was a very valuable lesson that my mum gave me, was because when I was young, she used to, like, I was enrolled in piano and all these other classes. During the holidays, she would send me to all these holiday programs and things like that to learn different things and different skills. So that, you know, once I got a bit of freedom in high school and I sort of just let everything slide because my parents were too busy or whatever the case may be, you know, it came back to me when I hit those later years in high school that, hey, I need to actually do something if I want to achieve something. And so when I remember having this thought when I was in, where was it, year 10 or year 11, that, you know, I realized that, hey, I'm not actually dumb. It's just that if I give myself a choice between, I can either do this or I can do something fun like play games or play computer games or go out with my friends or do something like that.
Yeah.
You're probably going to choose that because it's easy.
Yep.
But when I was young, I had no choice about going to all of these things, because when you're in primary school, wherever your parents ferry you, you go to swimming classes, okay, you go to piano, you go to whatever, like language class, Chinese language classes, you go to tutoring. You just go wherever they send you. You don't question it.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, if you could do all that, so, you know, you think about your school week and it's Monday to Friday, but then if almost every day you've got an extracurricular activity and then you're going to Chinese school or language school on the weekend, it's like, okay, if I could achieve all that when I was, you know, at that young age, just because I didn't have to think about it, all I need to do is just take away the choice. There is no choice other than to do these things. And then over time, that actually then builds that resilience to actually push through, because like if you're not really good at studying, like that first 5 minutes is torture.
Yeah.
You know, but once you get that little bit of momentum, then it's like, okay, now you've finished an hour and you haven't even batted an eyelid. And you're not tired, and you can probably even start pushing through, and then, you know, get to the point where you then, you know, you're doing all-nighters to try and cram as much as you can in before the final exam. Whether that's right or wrong, you know, there's different methodologies on it, but that's, you know, what I sort of got to in terms of that learning. So I guess, you know, for you, when you then came across to Australia, was that a big culture shock for you?
Yeah. I mean, I started to believe, because I went backward in math, as an example, right? I went backward in math because I was learning English. And then in high school, I wasn't very good at math. And I started to have this belief of, I'm just not a math person. You know, that belief of, in Macedonia, there's no such thing as I'm not a math. Everyone's a math person, because you just get grilled to learn it and you practice it over and over and over, and everyone knows math. So it's like, it's just that when you give, there's actually a great book. It's called The Happiness Trap by Dr. Russ Harris. And he's specializes in a type of therapy called ACT therapy, acceptance commitment therapy. And he says the brain is great at creating excuses or reason giving, but that's just excuses. So for example, he goes, rub your head. And this is something that you got, if you listen to it, try this, like rub your head right now. And then at the same time, say to yourself, I can't rub my head. I can't rub my head. I can't. And then rub your head. And you realize, like, just because you say you can't do it doesn't mean that it's necessarily true. So a lot of people go, I'm tired, I can't go for a run. It's not factually true. You can run, you're just tired. I'm injured and I have a leg operation and I can't go for a run is a fact. I'm tired and I can't go for a run is just a fucking excuse.
Yep.
So it's our language and the things we start to believe and the reasons we give ourselves, a lot of the times are outs. And man, I have had over 1,000 consults over the last 3 years with people who are struggling with their health. Like really, they know, they say themselves, they're like, if I don't fix this, I will get cancer and die. And then they'll find an out to not change. And it frustrates me because I'm like, I want it more than you do, but it's just not popular these days to talk about it. It's popular to talk about how you feel. And feelings are one thing, thoughts are another thing, but actions are entirely different.
Yeah.
Just because you feel one way doesn't mean you always act on it.
No.
Sometimes you might feel rage and want to kill the person in the car in front of you, but you don't do it.
Yep.
And that's, there's a difference. Let the feeling pass. You might not feel like doing it in this moment, but do it anyway because it's the right thing to do.
Yep.
And this is how all successful people in whatever field, whether it's sports, academics, whatever it is, they do the thing even when they don't feel like doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not popular now. It's more popular to listen to your feelings and be easy on yourself and give yourself permission to rest. That's great once you've earned it.
Yeah.
But
well, so this is the thing, right? You take that path of least resistance, so you feel good today.
Yeah.
But you take the path of harder resistance, and you feel great tomorrow.
If you do everything all the time because it feels good in the moment, I guarantee you will live a life of misery.
Yeah.
If you just eat the cake because you feel like it because it's delicious and you never practice temperance and like pulling yourself back and going, actually, that's not the right thing to do, then you will live a life of misery. You'll be sick, you'll be broke, you'll be exhausted, you'll be unwell, you won't have good relationships.
Well, it's funny because you can almost, Google any idea today and you'll find, a positive argument for it and a negative argument for it. Like, say as an example, the idea of work-life balance, some people will go, oh, there's no such thing as work-life balance.
Yep.
Because, and then they'll give you like the really nice sort of sounding, oh, but if you really love what you do, you never work a day day in your life, right? And which sounds great, but the reality is that, work is work. Right?
Correct.
You need to have that mindset that, hey, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do something. You can love it as much as you like. And I'll give you a great example because I was absolutely gutted last night. I've been putting together this another fight study, and I'm going to do it on the 4 fights that Brandon Moreno and Davison Figueiredo had in the UFC, right? Because I was like, oh, this is a pretty cool story that I want to try and tell. And like I just spent the last 4 nights, editing, trying to clip up all the little bits and pieces. And then yesterday, like I'm doing something on the laptop, and then I get an error that, oh, for whatever reason, my edit can't save.
Oof. And
I've clicked OK, and then it's just disappeared. Right, 4 nights worth of work, and I'm like, oh, mother. Like, and I was so gutted, and I was just there, like just sitting there going, oh, this is shit. F my life. Like, you put a lot of work in, and then it's like, okay, well, originally I was like, oh, I've got this timeline, this is when I want to do it. And it's like, and that's what, like, even though I really enjoy doing it, like it's still work. Now I've got to go back and like, I still love doing it, but it doesn't mean I want to do it again.
Yeah.
Like I just already gone through and done, 4 nights worth of work on this thing. And now I've got to go back and start from the beginning again to sort of clip it all up. Right. So, this is, it's interesting because a lot of people want to talk about the idea of motivation. Forget motivation. It's all about discipline.
Correct.
Right. Motivation is great because, that means when you're feeling it, you can actually do something. But what about the days that you're not feeling it? And if you got, family, kids, or you got, you're in a job that you don't currently enjoy, if you, let's say you've got like, your passion projects that you want to do, but then you're working in this job that you need to make ends meet, right? Well, what you don't need is motivation. What you need is discipline because you still need to be able to work that 9 to 5 day and then go and do whatever it else is that you want to do after hours. Yeah. Right. So it's the same thing for me. Like, at the moment, like I'm sort of, I'm podcasting, I do sports commentary, I do all these other bits and pieces, but I'm also a full-time dad. Yeah. I've got to do the school runs, I've got to do all this, and which has been very interesting because it allows me to appreciate what my wife used to do. As we had this sort of like a little bit of a role reversal. But then it's like, it's not all fun and games. It's not like I get to do whatever I want during the day. Yeah. I've got to go and do so many of these other things that by the time it's actually time that I get to do and work on the things that I want to do, it's already 9 o'clock at night. Or, if I've gone to training at night, it might be 9:30, 10 o'clock before I even start. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, I've got to make the most of these couple of hours before I go to bed and I don't want to just work all the way through the night because if I work till say 2 a.m., 3 a.m. because I got the momentum, that's great. But boy, do you suffer the next day. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So you got to build you got to be disciplined, not only in the things that you do, but also being able to say, okay, that's enough for tonight. Come back and go again the next day. Yep. Rather than just stuff yourself up because, occasionally I do it because like, I'm going to finish this tonight. And that'll normally be like a Saturday night. Like I'll be like, okay, I'm going to stay up as long as it takes. And, 3 a.m., put this thing out and then finally go to bed and then feel like shit all Sunday. But then like, I've earned the rest because I've actually completed that project. Correct. And doesn't that feel better than not doing anything? Oh, absolutely. Like, right. This is the thing. Like I love saying this line, but it's like, if you're not growing, and this applies to anything, anything that people are involved with. So if we talk about, Jiu Jitsu as an art form, if it's not growing, it's just slowly dying. Yeah. Right? And so the reason why I say Jiu Jitsu as an art form, like if we think about a lot of traditional martial arts, a lot of them are just slowly dying right now. They've got their current crop of practitioners who, enjoy the training or whatever the case may be. But if they don't attract new people to that sport or to that art form, it'll be gone. It's the same thing in churches. You know, if churches don't go out and evangelize and bring new people into the church, as their parishioners get older and they pass away, like it's just a church that is slowly dying.
Correct.
And if we look at the definition of a church as being just a group of people, you know, a group of people meeting together.
Yeah.
Well, when there's nobody left to meet, there's no church, is there?
Yeah.
Right. Same thing applies to business. Right. And this is where, you know, I think people get very caught up in this idea that, oh, capitalism is evil, but because businesses are made of people, right? If a business doesn't grow, then it is just slowly dying. And I always like to talk about like this idea that in any business there are sort of three clear distinctions of level, right? There's the owner, operator, so the person that starts the business. There's the manager, who looks after the monthly running of the business, you know, they're looking at profits and all that sort of stuff. And then there's the employee that does the tasks. And they're the employees are the people that do the daily operations of the business. But, you know, when you start a business, well, you're probably wearing all three hats. You're the person that started the business. You've got this long-term vision in terms of where you want to go. You're managing your work. You're managing the work that you need to, you know, whether it's you got agencies that do certain things for you, or you got contractors that do other bits and pieces for you. And then you're the employee also doing the hands-on work at the end of it. But if your business isn't slowly growing, then there is no opportunity for you to delineate those three roles.
Yeah.
But, you know, and so I often use this one as an example. Like if you think of like a plumbing business, right? You go and do your plumbing apprenticeship. You finish your plumbing apprenticeship and you decide I'm going to start XYZ plumbing. So you're wearing all three hats. You know, you go and put some ads out in whatever mediums to try and get business, whether it's on Google or the internet or whatever. You start your Instagram page, you do all these bits and pieces. You're booking the work, you're doing the quotes, and you're actually doing the physical manual work. Yeah. Right? And then you get to this point where you're so busy during the week that you could probably afford to pay somebody, a subcontractor, to go and do the work for you. Yeah. So, you know, if you do that, now you're still wearing all three hats, but you've got an employee with you. And then over time, that might expand to 5, you know, other subcontractors, and you realize, you know, I don't even need to do the work anymore. I'll just give it out to my subcontractors, and now I can focus on just being the owner and the manager. Yeah. Right. And then, you know, you're still doing all these things like, you know, your accounts receivable, your accounts payable, your all that sort of stuff. And as your business grows, now you got, you know, say 20 subcontractors working for you. So you're not doing any of the employee level work anymore. But then you go, it's too much admin for me to do as one person. So now I can employ, you know, a manager to do accounts receivable or accounts payable and run my accounts and payroll and all this sort of stuff, so that you can now step away from some of those roles. And over time, like if you think about how any big business is created, it's through that process of the more a business grows, the more room there is between the layers. Yeah. So that's when you get, you know, a company that's got a lot of mid-level management, is because between the employee and the manager, or a general manager as an example. So it might be the employee level, you know, a salesperson as an example, and the general manager, well, there's probably a sales manager in there. There's a service manager in there, and you can afford those roles only because the business has grown. And so as an employee, you know, when anybody starts in a business, they don't really get told these things. No. You just sort of go, okay, I'm going to work at this shop, and what am I doing? I'm the cashier guy or the cashier chick, right? I scan the goods and that's it. You know, whether I do a good or a bad job, who cares, right? And so then you get into this mentality of, it's a dead-end job. But the thing is, if you can instill in your people that, hey, that role is actually very important. Yeah. You do a good enough job of that, you probably want to then become a manager, or you might get a management opportunity or more responsibility because you've shown you can handle the responsibility of doing the daily tasks, right? And then it's like, okay, so that person now feels like they've got a career, so they put that effort in. They become a manager. Well, there's a couple of problems there. So the first problem is that, you know, when you become a manager, it's like becoming a parent. No one can go and say, oh, this is what you do. You know, you can read as many books as you like, but until you're thrown into that capacity, you don't really know what you're in for. Yeah. Right. And so then, you know, you go on this big, long journey of how do I learn to be a good people manager and blah, 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 blah. And you got this, you feel like, oh, I've got a bit of a career path ahead of me. And then it's like, by being good at that management role, you've now grown, you know, however many more employees underneath you to scale the work that you're doing. And then it's like, before you know it, you know, that mid-level manager has become a senior manager, or might even make partner in that business or something like that. And that's unfortunately the nature of anything that people are involved with, is that without that growth, yes, it is a dead-end job. Yeah. If that business can't grow, there is no space for that employee to go anywhere else. Yeah. Right? And so this is the thing that a lot of leaders can fail to recognize, is that there are leaders that are just happy because they've made it to a comfortable point in life where they go, I'm okay for this to just be the way that it is, right? And so then there's no growth opportunity. there's no increasing separation between the layers. So then that way there's less progression for the people within that business. And so where do your best people go?
Yeah.
They go elsewhere.
Correct. Yeah.
Because if they're not growing, they're just slowly dying as well.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's sad in one sense, but it's also very beautiful in the other sense. And that's why, typically when businesses are growing the fastest, that's what attracts more like-minded people, because they're like, oh, look at this place. There's something going, with that, right? Does that resonate for you in any sense?
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting that you say that, because I listened to a video this morning, or was it last night, about Elon Musk and Twitter, and how he had a meeting with everyone at Twitter and said, this is what we're going to do now. Like, we are going to work 10 times harder and blah, blah, blah. And if you don't want to be here, that's fine.
Yep.
And everyone was like, oh my God, he's bringing back this capitalist. But it's not. There are some people who want that.
Yep.
Like, there are the people who want that. They go, I'm happy to sleep 4 hours and work towards a purpose, towards a vision, towards a dream. And a lot of leaders don't instill that vision and dream. And what I've learned is, and it's funny because you said capitalism is evil. I used to think that. Like, I think every person somewhere in their young, they go through the like, oh, why don't we all just, it's all nice and fair and everyone can have the same thing and blah, blah, blah. But it's not. It's reality is world isn't like that. And most people that have gotten to that high level of business or whatever it is, they actually deserve it. They, even if they're not the nicest people, they're very competent at what they've done. Obviously, that's why they've got the big business and got the money and got all the things that everyone else wants.
Yeah.
And the people who haven't just haven't gone through those things.
Well, I always like to say that it's your propensity. So the bigger the problem that you solve, the more money that you're entitled to make.
Yep.
So you solve a bigger problem. So as an example, in your business, you're solving health problems for people.
Yep.
You solve a health problem like that. Well, you're entitled to make money from it.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's very, like, I feel like the people that might think that capitalism is evil would be too far removed from the idea that, hey, without capitalism, well, you go and till your own land.
Yeah.
You grow your own vegetables or raise your own cattle, right? You slaughter your own cattle. You make your own clothes. You tan your own hide. You make your own tools. Yeah. Like, how far do you want to go?
And you have all that, but it's not owned by you. It's owned by the government.
Well, that's also yeah.
So it's like, again, like, I grew up in a country that was communist, and I've seen one side of the population be like, one side of the population is very entrepreneurial, very driven to advance, and the other side is, I'll just wait for the government to pay me. And those people are more lazy from my experience.
Yep.
And in how I grew up, like, my laziness was not a thing. Like, it was very looked down upon by my dad, my mom, everyone in my immediate family. But there is like one side of the population that's lazy and wants to hang around all day and complain about the world, and the government will pay me and I'll just keep smoking my cigarettes and die. And then there's the other side who are like pushing, trying to advance, trying to build a business, trying to do something, trying to, whatever it is. And who would you rather be?
That's right. Yeah, you got to chase something.
So,
as I said, if you're not growing, you're just slowly dying. So.
Yeah, and you mentioned discipline, and I'll go back to like the kids. You said, how do I instill what was it?
Resilience.
Resilience in a kid. I think sports.
Yeah.
Because actually, when you look at a lot of CEOs and when you look at the even literature out there, a lot of the high performers in corporate, in business, are former sports people. Whether they were on the rowing team at university or they were swimmers or they were. Sports instills resilience because you will lose.
Yep.
You will have to turn up when you don't feel like it. You will cry. You will be painful. You will experience all those things in a safe, productive environment. Yeah. Without abuse.
Yeah, and it's discipline too, right? Yeah. Because you got to turn up to the training sessions.
Yeah.
If you know that, okay, on these days this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And there's no ifs or buts. Like you're naturally building that muscle of resilience as a result of it.
Correct. And sometimes it's just a place for just taking instruction and doing it even if you don't agree with it. Like, Jiu Jitsu is beautiful, martial arts is beautiful because you go from white belt to black belt. So you earn your authority. And as a white belt, you just shut up and do what the instructor says. Right? And John Danaher says it. He's like, white and blue, it's like, I'm the authority. You do it as I say. And then after that, you can have some free reign. And you need to do that in other areas of life, in business especially. Like, I've got friends who are my age, I'm 29, turning 30, and they've come out of uni and they've gotten their first job. They don't really like it. They're not getting paid enough, so they go to another one. And it's like, why do you think you have the right to demand more money? You can't just demand it. You can't feel entitled to it. You have to deserve it. So how about you stay at that job and you overperform and you go back and ask for a raise in 6 months?
Yeah.
Because that's what the people higher up want. But if you just feel entitled to things and if you want to not listen to instructions, and it's not going to get you anywhere.
No, of course.
So attitude's like the most important thing I find, whether it's business or martial arts, attitude and like being coachable and respectful, that'll get you so much further in life than IQ.
Absolutely. Yeah. You need to have the right, and even in the way that you approach it, it's how you word things, right? Like, I had this manager when I first started working at Turner Motor Corporation, and his name was John Perdry. And he said to me, you know, Johnny, you don't get bees with vinegar, right? And it's such a very Aussie thing to say, right, when you think about it. But if you really think about it, yeah, it's like if you want to get honey, or if you want bees to be around, and yes, bees can sting you, but without bees, there's no fruit, right? There's no flowers. There's a lot of things. You know, bees are like the lifeblood of nature, essentially, because they go and pollinate all your flowers to create your fruit. You know, your passion fruits, your strawberries, all of these things. You need bees, right? So likewise, if you think about, you know, all your co-workers and colleagues that are in business with you, you know, they're not out to get you. You know, they're there to do a job as well, right? And look, you know, I say that, you know, knowing that there are absolutely managers out there who are probably out to get some of their staff, right? But that falls into a slightly different category of, you know, these are managers that aren't educated, you know, and then, as I said, you know, when you become a manager, you don't get given the guidebook in terms of how to be a good manager. There are plenty of poor ones out there, and they've only gotten there just because they were either the best at what they were doing as an employee or by tenure, right? But anyway, let's come back to your story. So when your parents decided that they were coming to Australia, did they say anything? Like, what did they tell you? Like, how did you feel about it?
Not much, to be honest.
Yeah?
They didn't really have a discussion with me or anything like that. It was just, for all I remember, and I don't remember much, is just one day being at the front of the house and saying goodbye to everyone and saying goodbye to my uncle and my grandma and my friends. And
did you realise that you wouldn't see him for a long time, or you didn't think about it?
I don't think it computed at that time. Yeah, so that was it.
And then, you guys, did you guys come over on a plane?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Was that your first plane ride, or?
First one.
And then how'd you feel?
It was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excited more than anything else?
Yeah, I think excited, a bit like nervous about what to expect. And then it was very uncomfortable. Like, obviously I didn't speak English. It was all new, like got bullied, like, you know, the classic kind of immigrant story, but turned it around pretty quick, I think. Yeah.
So what did they bully you about?
Either way, I would pronounce things, not knowing words, you know, things like that.
Yep. So then when you came to school in Australia, which high school did you go, or which primary school did you go to?
Nawi Public School.
Yep. Okay.
And then I went to Peakhurst High School and then Oatley Senior Campus.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then, you know, how would you describe yourself as a kid in high school then? So
high school, like lone wolf.
Lone wolf.
I had friends, like I was pretty much friends with everyone. I was like extroverted, quite friendly, but I just did my own thing. Yep. And I would, you know, go to the gym after school, go to Jiu Jitsu. That was like my main focus. I just wanted to train and just get through school, and didn't really party much, never really drank, mostly because sports. I wanted to compete, and I knew that I shouldn't be doing those things. And because also dad would grill it into me, you know, sports is more important. So sports were really like the thing that kept me straight.
Yep.
So that was me. And then finished, I've always been like very serious, I think. You know, never really much fun. It was all about like achievement driven, and fun can be saved for later.
Yep.
And then I finished school, and same thing with university. And yeah, it was always mostly training and trying to achieve things.
So when you came to Australia, did you start with jiu-jitsu again, or is that when you started jiu-jitsu, or did you come and then you're doing karate again, or?
So we came and I did taekwondo.
Oh, you did taekwondo, okay.
So Nawi Public School had taekwondo after school in the hall with Habib Francis, who was my instructor at the time, and he was a great man. Didn't charge me for classes because he knew that we would just move to the country.
Yep.
He would drive me home after class. He was actually a CEO of a big company at the same time. So he was I've always been very fortunate, very lucky to have like great instructors of character, not so much skill, but just their characters, like as a man, as people, been great. So that was taekwondo, and then I earned my black belt. I did like, I think from the age of 9 to 15, just Taekwondo. And then I decided I wanted to fight. I used to watch like Crow Cop and Fedor, and that's when I found Rob, and Rob is Macedonian. I went, I'm going to go to Jiu Jitsu there, and I started at 15, and that was it. So yeah.
How was your first session? Do you remember what it was like walking into the gym and getting crushed?
I just got crushed, dude. Like this was back in the days when it was in Bexley, so it was even like it would smell. You know, it was an old school gym. That's where David came up. Like David and I trained together there, and got smashed.
Yeah.
And there was no teenage classes. There was no.
So straight into the adults.
I was straight into the adults. Yeah. So from the age of 15, like at the time it was like me, Rob, David, Stefan, like all these guys are beasts, and jiu-jitsu was very young back then. And it just, it was a good place to be.
What was it that made you want to fight? Like, you know, and I guess the second part of that is did you ever tell your parents that you wanted to do that?
What made me, I don't know what made me want to fight. I think, I don't know, maybe like on a deeper level, like subconscious level, maybe like approval. Did I tell my parents? I didn't tell them that I wanted to do it as a career, but I did tell them when I had fights coming up. Dad was like, oh, okay, I'll come with you. He liked it, but he didn't want me to do it full time. Mum, obviously not at all. But yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah. But I'm grateful for it because I learned a lot of lessons. And up until I went to Tristar in Canada, like that's in my mind I had set as I'm going to fight in the UFC, and I thought I was capable of doing it. I thought I had the skills to do it, and I was at the age where I could develop at least to be in the top 10. And then whatever happens from there is kind of outside of your control. I think a lot of it comes down to luck and staying injury free and having the right opportunities. But I thought at least I have a good enough base to get to like top 10. And then that changed for a few reasons, but the main one, I just decided not to do it. When I went to Tristar and I lived in the dorms and I saw what the guys who were fighting in the UFC were living like, I realized I don't really want this. Like I don't want to be this uncomfortable for this long and to not have money and you know, there was only one George St. Pierre. So that's when I kind of went and then I started the business and started making a decent income, and I like that lifestyle better. And I went, I want to do this instead, and I'll leave that dream alone because I don't think it's for me. Yeah. I didn't like the stress of it. I found it very stressful.
Well, I think that applies to the way people view a lot of things in life. You know, we look at somebody who's like, say, a successful CEO of a business. And we go, I'd love to be that guy. But then you don't really think about what do you have to give up to get to that, right? Because we always think, you know, you can achieve anything that you want. Yes, you can.
At the expense of something else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? You have to sacrifice something. There's nothing that you can gain in life that doesn't come from a sacrifice of something else.
Correct.
Right? So you want to be the best at X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, where are your priorities on the other side of things? Yeah. Right? Are you going to give up, you know, what are the things that you can give up to allow you to have the time to just focus on these things? Yeah. And, you know, it's that sustained ability over a long period of time that is actually the only thing that's going to yield you the result. Yeah. You know, it's no good saying, oh, yeah, I could give it up. And then, you know, after a year, you're like, oh, no, I can't really give it up. You know, what have you learned after a year? Not enough.
Yeah.
Right? So it's over time, you know, that you get like, I guess, the compounding interest. So you got to try and identify things that you could do as part of a routine, you know, every day. You can have that consistency and you can go, you know, I can actually see myself doing this for the next 50 years. And that is then going to give you that specific outcome that you want. Because then it's only a matter of when, not if.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. I think, I honestly think everyone, given the right like foundation, if, for example, with mixed martial arts, like if you want to be a professional fighter at a high level, if you've grown up doing some form of martial arts, you have a decent athletic background by the age of 20, like if you're okay, you're a blue belt, say, or a white belt, and you've got a background in karate, you can do it.
Yep.
It's going to be fucking hard. But if you dedicate from 20 to 25 just to mixed martial arts and you go to you know, and that's all you do, you can do it.
Yeah. Look, it's interesting because like there are kids that are like shining stars, you know, when they're very young. And I grapple with this a lot, you know, in thinking about my own kids, right? Like I want them to do martial arts, but I don't want to, there will be an element where, like you have to force them, but at the same time, it's like you want them to also develop their own passion for it as well.
Yep.
To understand that, hey, you know, in the bigger scheme of things, these are life skills that are actually very valuable for your long-term growth as well. And it's going to teach you a lot of things. But you know, I don't want to be one of those, like a jiu-jitsu dad, so to speak, you know, who forces their kids and, you know, you're trying to live vicariously through your kids. Because I think that's detrimental to their long-term well-being because, they might be great, you know, up until, say, the age of 16, and then they realize that, oh, there's this whole other life that I could be living.
Happens all the time, yeah.
And then you've lost them. It's like you made them peak too soon.
Yeah.
I'd rather just like, you know, drip feed them slowly, make it fun, you know, and realize that, hey, life is a long game. You know, like I'm 38, about to be 39. It's like, it's still a long game. Like for me, martial arts is something that I've done my whole life, and I'll continue to do for the rest of my life. Like I sort of anticipate when I'm, you know, I go through the Asian genetics of, you know, I'm going to look like this until I'm like, 60 or 70. And then suddenly poof one day, you know, you got to look at Johnny and he's like, oh, Johnny.
White hair.
Yeah, you white hair, big goatee and like what, you know, I'm not hunched over with a walking stick and you go, what happened to Johnny? Like suddenly just changed overnight. That's typical Asian genetics, right?
Yeah. So,
but, you know, I sort of anticipate that, you know, it may not be with the same rigor that I'm currently doing. Yeah, but I'd like to think that I'd still be on the mats and still doing everything that I'm doing currently, provided, you know, you look after yourself, you don't take too many injuries, and you enjoy it most of all.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, out of curiosity, you know, when you finished high school, did you have any idea what you wanted to study? So, or how did you fall into the whole thing about studying nutrition at university?
I was always passionate about that. I wanted to do nutrition because of sport. It's like it'll make me better as a sports person, but I actually went into uni. I did international studies, some fucking random degree, and dropped out within 3 weeks. Okay. I was like, this is not for me. I don't see myself working corporate. I hate this. I'm dropping out. Dad wasn't happy about that. And then in that year, I did my certificate 3 and 4 in personal training. Yep. And then I reapplied the next year for nutrition. And that's how that went. Okay. But I didn't really have a plan. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. That was what I was most passionate about at that moment. Looking back, like I'm sure there was more financially viable ways I could have done it. But, you know, when you're young, you're 19, 18, you don't really know. You're not thinking that far ahead. Some people are, but I wasn't. And I was like, this is what I feel drawn to. Anytime I had free time, I was reading a book about nutrition or listening to a podcast, or that's all I did. So I was like, well, it makes sense to just study this. And if I wasn't so passionate about it, I probably wouldn't have finished the degree, to be honest, because it was hard and uni is difficult and I wasn't the best student. So if it was something else where I didn't have like a particular interest in it, I think I would have not finished university. So I just felt very drawn to it. And then from there, things just built. And now I actually really love business. Like I love the idea of turning an idea into something that employs people and pays wages, and all of a sudden it's producing. But one day, at some point it was just a thing, a thought. And I think that's really cool. So these days I'm more passionate about kind of figuring out different ways to improve the business, help other people grow their business, and turn an idea into something that is producing a service or a product or an income. Yeah.
Okay. So you already touched on it, but I guess, you know, to go back to when you realize being at Tristar that, hey, you know, the life of a fighter isn't as glamorous as people would like to believe. You know, everybody would love to be that 1%, you know, the Conor McGregors and the GSPs or the Khabibs of the world. But, you know, when you start to realize the amount of sacrifice and all of those other things that go along with it, you know, so that was your realization when you were over at Tristar, and you sort of realized after 18 months there, it's like, okay, I'm really going to do this. This is going to be a pretty difficult road, financially, emotionally, everything. I guess, what did Firas say to you about it? Like, did you ever chat with him about how you're feeling and those thoughts?
He didn't really. I never told him, hey, I don't want to fight anymore. He never pushes anyone. For him, it's if you want to, you will, and I'll help you. But he never really pushes people in a direction. I kind of think he gave me clues and hints early on to not fight. Really? I remember having dinner with him one time and I left and I was like, was he telling me not to do this, you know? But he kind of explained his story. He was like, you know, George wanted to fight. That's all he wanted to do. Whereas Faraz has a degree in philosophy. He's got 3 kids and family life and businesses. He wanted more of a holistic kind of life. But he kind of explained to me, I remember at the time, he said, if you want to fight, that's what you do. There's like nothing else that you can do at the same time. You can try, but for the most part, fighting is priority. It's a very all-encompassing life. And I didn't want that. I've always wanted a family. I've always wanted other things. I've been interested in a lot of things, and I'm like, if I fight, that's the only thing I can do.
Yep.
So that's the journey I took, which I think was very similar to his journey. So I have a lot of respect for fighters who just do that, because it's a massive sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's a huge sacrifice.
Yeah. It's one of those things like, so for me, when I was, when I started working in the automotive industry, so I started as an apprentice, right? And I remember having this conversation with the owner of the business at the time. And he knew that, I was really passionate about martial arts. And he was like, Johnny, he told me this story about how when he was young, he's a really good golfer. And, if he wanted to pursue golfing, he probably would have made it to the PGA and all that sort of stuff. But he then, was saying to me, for him, he ended up choosing to go with business over chasing this dream of being a pro golfer, because in terms of what that could give his life. Like now he owns, car dealerships. He makes, very, very good money. He can play golf whenever he wants.
Yep.
Right. So he sort of articulated it to me that way. And so, I always felt very torn when I was working and training, because it was like, there was a part of me that, wanted to go and pursue this martial arts avenue. But then there was this other part of me that was doing, I had a career going. I had, started to establish myself in the automotive industry. And then it's like, it's in life, you actually can love more than one thing. You can enjoy more than one thing.
Yep.
Right. So then it was like, okay, well, because I've got two fantastic opportunities in front of me. It's like, which one do you do? Right. And so I actually felt like, in hindsight now, I look back on that advice and I go, look, I think that advice was very specific to the time that he grew up in. I feel like it's less so nowadays, just because there's so much information available that the reality is, to be, to me, in my eyes anyway, yes, you need to have the dedication and the discipline to be a really good fighter. But there's so much of it that is now such a mental game as well, that yes, aside from your training sessions, you need to be doing study outside of those sessions as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep. And
so from that perspective, understanding that there's a mental game to it, sometimes it's actually good for you to do things that take you away from it, so that you can actually be refreshed. And sometimes, work could actually be that thing. If you're working a job and you're trying to be a fighter, or sometimes, if you were just training full time and all you did was train and be in your own thoughts, you might even talk yourself out of it half the time, because you're just in your mind, there's always this negativity that's gnawing at you saying, oh, why do you think you can do this? Or you can't do this, everybody has these doubts, right? And by having, something that takes you away from it, it actually, it's like they say, change is as good as a holiday. You take a step away, you go and do something else, but then that actually motivates you more, because you might be working, say, a dead end job, but then you come back to training and go, no, this is why I really want to do this.
Yeah, I'm so glad I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah. For sure.
So I feel like, it's a bit different in today's world, that it'll be, it still comes back down to priority. So I'm not saying that you can do everything that you want, but if you understand that, hey, okay, yes, I could probably have a successful career and I could probably fight. I could start my own business and I could fight. Yeah. Right. But then if you start to then go, I could have a successful business, I could have a big family. Yeah. And then I could fight. Different story, because it's like now you're starting to add more than one variable, right? Yeah. You're going to 3s and 4s, and it's like, okay, how many kids you got? How much time are you going to spend with them? How much time are you going to spend at the gym? How much time are you going to spend on your work, right? So as you add more things, it's actually, almost like what you say about diet, right? It's about the things that you take out, right? What can you take out to actually achieve this goal that you want, and what are your priorities like? So, I just thought that was an interesting parallel.
I think you can do two things world class. Yeah. At a very high level. Yep. I don't know about more than two. Yeah. You could be a great business person and a great athlete. Yep. You could be a great dad and a great business person. Yeah. Once you start adding a third, that's where it becomes a bit difficult. Yeah. Right?
Then it's like, I think you got to find things that are, there's translation between them. So if your business was then in martial arts or health and fitness, correct, different story, because now you got alignment of that. Yeah. Yeah. So absolutely. I agree with you 100% on that. So, okay. Let's, when you finished your nutrition degree, was that when is that when you started, or did you do other things before you?
I did other things.
Yep. Okay. So let's talk about some of those.
Yeah. So I finished my degree and I worked for a company called Spectrum Pharmaceuticals. Yep. They're an Australian-based company. They make custom probiotic formulas and very specialized formulas. They're practitioner only, so they're not something you can buy off the counter, but they're really good. And my boss at the time, there was two people that I worked under, Dr. Anthony Underwood, who who was like an integrative pediatrician, and Stephen Burton, who was more of the business side. And he really mentored me. He taught me a lot about business, about sales, about presenting products, about all of that kind of commercial stuff. And Dr. Anthony taught me more about the clinical stuff. So I learned a lot from them, and it was great. It was an awesome job. I got exposed to the integrative world. I was very young, and I was like, wow, didn't even know this existed. Went to all the seminars, learned a lot about clinical things and business things. And that's where the idea kind of started. I was like, I wonder if anyone's doing this online. And that's kind of where we went from there. So I had that job up until I left for Canada. I remember being really nervous quitting my job because I felt really bad. And I went to see Stephen, and I was like, look, I want to move overseas. And he was like, yep, saw it coming. Like, I did the same thing. He was like, I was your age, and I actually lived in Montreal as well. And
oh, wow.
And he's like, it's part of the journey. Like, it's what you do at your age. This is the time to do it. It's age appropriate. If you don't do it now, you
won't do it.
You won't do it. And so he was really supportive, which I really liked that about him. And that was it, man. So he said, there's always a door open if you want to come back, but for now, I think you need to go do this thing. So
out of curiosity, when it comes to probiotics and prebiotics, so can you help me with the distinction between the two? So a prebiotic is meant to be something that's meant to help facilitate the growth.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah. And the probiotic is us externally putting in a bacteria that otherwise might not exist in your microbiome.
Okay. So before people then just, take any sort of generic probiotic supplement, so to speak, they should really actually be getting tested to know what they actually need.
Correct. And sometimes probiotics can make it worse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like sometimes if somebody has a significant candida overgrowth or just an overgrowth of different bacteria, we don't want them taking probiotics. We don't really want them drinking kombucha or eating fermented foods because it's just promoting the growth of that bacteria that's now overcolonized the gut. So it's not always a good idea to have it. That's why I recommend testing. Like you can spend the next 2 years taking random products and trying different things and not getting anywhere. But for us, it's like I have the clinical knowledge and experience. I have an idea of what I think is going on, but let's also test. And now we have both pieces of data and we can create a really accurate plan for you. Otherwise, you're just going around in circles guessing.
I find that really interesting because so my son, he had like quite bad eczema when he was a baby or toddler, so to speak. And so then we took him to like this allergy specialist.
Yep.
And, they do the pinprick tests and, expose him to all the different things. And then it's like, okay, this is the plan of how we're going to expose him to egg and peanuts and all this sort of stuff. But one of the things that they recommended, and they didn't, we never did a stool test, so to speak. But they said, they recommended this particular probiotic. And that was one of the things on the protocol that we would have to give him.
Yeah.
Which would help him with his allergies or eczema, so to speak.
Do you remember the name of it? Lactobacillus reuteri or bifidо.
I don't know. I can't remember what's actually in it. I'll take a photo of it afterwards.
Yeah. There are specific ones that you recommend for different strains for different things.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So generally, if someone's got eczema or dermatitis as young age, usually bifidobacteria is quite low. So you recommend that. But not always. You don't always have to run a stool test. In general, probiotics are better to take than not to take. Okay. But if you want maximum results and you really want to, if you're having like chronic issues with your gut, a probiotic won't be the answer. Yeah. Very rarely. So IBS cases are usually because of a combination of thyroid issues, bacterial infections, food allergies, stress response. A probiotic alone won't address all of those.
I can see what you're coming from with that. Okay. So after Spectrum Pharmaceuticals, you went to Canada. Were you working when you were in Canada?
No.
You just trained 18 months full time?
Well, no, that's where I started the business.
Oh, that's when you started. Okay.
Yeah. So that's where I kind of about halfway through my trip is when I started.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And that just came out of that, you're helping guys to do weight cuts and all that sort of stuff.
Helping guys to do weight cuts, and then obviously like having financial pressure, being like, fuck, I've only got savings. I've got to figure out a way to make money. So that really put me in an uncomfortable enough position to make it work, So by the end of the trip, the business was well and truly operating, and I was mainly focusing on that. I was working at a co-working space. I was only training like 3 times a week, and I was just working every day.
Yeah.
So when I went to Canada, the first half was all training, no work. And then by the end of it, it went from 3 times a week training to all work. So it was a really interesting like reprioritization in my life, because I was like, I thought I wanted to do this, but I ended up doing something completely different. So yeah, it's interesting.
So then, at what point did you decide, okay, I don't need to be in Canada anymore, I can come back to Australia and do this?
December 2019.
Yeah.
Right before COVID.
Yeah.
I had no idea COVID was happening. I just one day woke up and I was like, I really miss my family. I want to go home. It makes more sense to be in Australia because I'm working with mostly Australian patients. It was like middle of winter in Montreal.
Yep. Miserable.
Miserable. I'd gone through like personal things and I was like, man, I just don't want to be here anymore.
Yep.
I just woke up and booked my ticket one day and left like 2 weeks later.
Yeah. Wow.
And that was it. So
were your parents happy you came back?
Very. Yeah. I'm very happy. I was happy I came back too. It was so different. Like, you know, even the little things, like when you're away to a different city for almost 2 years, you forget a lot and you come back and things are strange. Like I didn't use I reckon for like 2 years. I hadn't said that for 2 years, you know, because everything changes the way you speak. You have to adjust to the people lingo, there, the lingo, the street signs are in French, the weather, like, so it's so different. But I was happy to be back. I could see myself living in Montreal if my family was there and if I had, you know, that there potentially, because it's a beautiful city, but it's cold, man. Like 6 months of winter. It's freaking cold. We're very lucky here. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But the training was amazing. Like for us, honestly, the guy leads from the front. Like he's there every day, twice a day, training, doing conditioning after class, sparring with the pros. His technique's on point. He's rolling everyone. Like the guy is really leading from the front. And it inspires you because you get the training, you finish the class and he's doing pull-ups and George is doing conditioning and you're like, well, what am I doing? Like this guy's already the GOAT. Why aren't I doing more? And so everyone does more. And that kind of just, you know, you get better by osmosis. You're just in the environment where you will just get better. So if you know, if you want to get better at jiu-jitsu or whatever it is, like put yourself in that environment and just turn up. Don't worry about strategies or hey, just turn up and you will get better. It was just so amazing to be in that gym. Like I can't describe it. It's insane. Yeah.
Okay. Let's, I want to ask you about this because in any business, you know, learning how to sell is probably a pretty important skill.
Love this topic. Yeah.
So I want to sort of understand, you know, where did you learn your sales skills from? Like what influences you in terms of sales ability and I guess, you know, what sort of homework did you do to try and improve your selling ability?
Yeah. Look, I did a lot of courses, a lot of mentorship.
Okay.
Paid for a lot of courses, like a lot of money and experience. But I guess the easiest way to explain it is to sell without selling, right? So what I want to remove in any conversation I have with someone is sales resistance. Like I don't want them to feel like they're being sold to. So the tonality is really important. Like when I get a call from an insurance salesperson, hey, it's so-and-so for blah, 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 and instantly I'm like, I don't want to talk to you because the tonality is salesy already. But if you get a call from someone, they're like, hey, is this Johnny? You're like, yeah, it is. Hey man, you put through an application. I just have a few minutes to get back to you. Now it's an authentic conversation. All people want is just an authentic conversation and the truth. And so whatever I can do early on in the conversation to lower the sales resistance so we can get straight to the problem and straight to the objection that is the real objection that we need to handle, that's what I'm trying to do. Because there's a lot of smoke screens. Selling is kind of like a dance. So it's like, are you going to tell me the truth or am I going to have to ask you again? Do I ask you in a different way? Because a lot of people, you know, objection handling, for example, is a big thing with sales.
Of course.
It's like the first objection isn't really the objection. And if you can just call it and be honest in a kind way and be like, look, you know, I need to think about it. It's like, okay, Tracy, that's fine. What's there to think about? Maybe I can help you. And then just say, like I normally just say to people, I'm like, look, I'll be completely honest with you. Most people that say they need to think about it never come back to me. And in 12 months now, they contact me again with even worse problems. And I don't want that to be you. So is there something that I can help you address today? And if it truly is just a logistical problem, put down a holding deposit and we'll get started next week.
Yeah.
And I just go straight to the thing, right? A lot of salespeople I find, don't want to say the truth because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
They want to have comfortable conversations.
Yeah, that's right.
You have to be open. You have to be willing to have an uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be confronting. It doesn't have to be you versus them.
Yeah.
It just has to be honest.
Well, I always used to tell my salespeople, there's two forms of negotiation. There's collaborative and combative.
Yeah.
Right? So we can either work together, to get a mutually beneficial outcome.
Yeah.
Or we can go to war.
And argue.
and argue, and one person's going to come away from that interaction feeling disgusting, they either got... chances are it's going to be a negative interaction, right? But, there's a few things that go into it.
I always go back to the beginning. It's like, hey, once you present the pitch and you do your thing and then there's the objection, I go back to just check again. Hey, you applied to us with this and this and this and this. Is that correct? Yes. Do you think this is a solution that you need? Yes. Why? Okay. Do you want to do it? Because if you want to do it, I could potentially be creative and figure out a way that we can make it possible and overcome that objection together. Yeah. But if you don't want to do it, that's fine. That's a different problem.
Yeah.
But do you want to do it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. Okay. What can we do to figure this out? I need to speak to my partner. Great. Do you want to have them on the call?
Yeah.
Maybe I can answer questions for them. It's likely they're just going to say no.
Yeah.
So how do we figure this out together?
Yeah.
So collaboration rather than like going to war against them and then no one wins.
Well, it's the concept I'd call that is top down, bottom up. So if you think about the sales funnel, and so, for anyone that might have heard me talk about the sales road to a sale before, but it's very big in car sales, right? So road to a sale is basically the process that we're ideally trying to take a customer through to best answer their needs.
Yep.
And to present the right products and sell them the right things or present the right things for them to then decide to purchase. But when I say top down, bottom up, it means that if you follow this process from the top down, and so usually we put it in a upside down triangle, and the reason why there's an upside down triangle is because that's to denote the amount of time that you should be spending on each step. So, if you think about the first step as being the meet and greet, well, yes, it should take a good amount of time because you need to make sure you're presentable, right? So first impressions count, right? So if you're not dressed accordingly or if you're not in the right frame of mind, these are the really important things that go into when you actually have that first conversation. Even when you pick up the phone, are you smiling? Are you not? Like, what's your mindset? That's why it's so important. That's why it's actually at the top. When you meet and greet with somebody, you need to make it. I always liken, and I love this analogy and I'm going to use it again, but I always talk about selling like being the way to find a good relationship.
Yep.
Right. So I'll try and talk in both parallels so people can understand this, for any of you prospective single people out there who want to learn how to close the deal. But so let's say as an example, you go to a party. Well, if you're out there single, ready to mingle and you want to try and find the right person, you want to look the part.
Yeah.
Right. Same thing in selling. If you're operating a business where you're selling cars or selling any sort of product, you need to be dressed appropriately for the market that you're trying to meet.
Correct.
I'd expect a different level of attire from somebody that's selling a Mercedes-Benz versus selling me a Kia.
Yeah.
Right? As an example. And I don't mean that in any derogatory sense, but so, the first impression matters and how you approach that conversation. Are you putting it on really thick, trying to sell somebody is something today and close a deal today, or are you actually just, saying hello and seeing if they need any assistance?
Yeah.
Right. So likewise, if I go in and I'm coming out desperate, going, I want to hook up with you tonight, it's a very different feel versus, hey, how you going? How's your night? Right.
Yeah.
And then so the next step after that is we go through this process, and a lot of traditional sales models call it qualification. For me personally, I don't like the word qualification because by nature of the word qualification, some people don't qualify. Yeah. Right. So if you're in a business where you're trying to maximize your return rate of sales, and I don't think that's a good thing for relationships, but for sales, it's perfect. You go through this idea of what we call needs discovery. Yeah. I want to find out what is it that you're chasing. How many seats do you need in the car? What are you looking for? What's important to you? Yeah. Is it space? Is it the engine? Is it, power? What are the things that are important to you? Yeah. And the same thing applies, when you're trying to identify a potential mate. What are you interested in?
What are your values?
What are your values?
What do you want? Yeah.
Right. Because if we don't have alignment on some of those things, well, depending on what the outcome is that you want, but if you're looking for a long-term relationship, if those things don't align, you're better off moving to a different model. Right?
Correct. Yeah.
So not to put it, trying to objectify women, so to speak, but because then the next phase after you've discovered the needs is to then go through this process of vehicle selection presentation. You want to find what is the right car, and then I'm going to present to you what are the reasons why I think this is the right thing.
Yeah.
Right. So likewise, if I'm trying to identify a potential mate, I want to make sure that I'm picking the right person, right? And then I also want to, present back, why I think I'm the right person for that person as well, right?
Yeah.
So, that's a very important step. And then you might go into this next phase, where if somebody's interested enough in that particular vehicle that you've selected or presented, they'll want to take it for a drive, right? Take it for a test drive. Let's date. Let's find out whether this really fits, and this can work together.
Yeah.
And then, once you sort of go on that date, you come to this sort of, or you start dating, so to speak, you come to a very important step. And that actually, I feel like this step is the most often overlooked step, whether it's in relationships or whether it's in sales. And that simple step is, I could just call it presenting figures, putting your cards on the table, right? People, when they go into negotiation, the first thing they say is, what's your best price, right? But they never establish, well, what is the actual price of the thing to begin with?
Yeah.
Right? And what are you selling me?
Yeah.
Right? Because it's one thing for me to tell you, okay, this thing is $50,000. It's another thing for me to then to then actually explain, okay, the price is $50,000. That includes X, Y, and Z. What's the warranty period? What's the servicing costs? What are all these other little things that people don't think about when they go to make a purchasing decision?
Yeah.
Likewise, in a relationship, if you get to this point in your relationship where you've been dating for a while, and now you're at this serious phase of your relationship, you really actually need to go and say, okay, this is what I'm looking for in a relationship, and this is what I'm looking for in life, right? Let me put my cards on the table. Let you put your cards on the table. So then we can try and understand what can we negotiate on to actually come to an agreement, or are some of these things deal breakers where we need to shut up shop and walk away?
Yeah.
Right? So that actual step of presenting figures is probably the most overlooked step in any negotiation, in any sale, or in any relationship.
Yeah.
Right? Coming to that point of the relationship to go and say, okay, we've been dating for a while, or we've gone on 3 dates or 5 dates or 10 dates or however long we've been dating. And it's like, what are we? What are we doing?
Yeah.
Right? Is there actually a future in this relationship?
Yeah.
Right? And until you actually present figures, you don't know what you're negotiating on.
Correct. Yeah.
Because a lot of the times people just go into this negotiation. It's like, oh, I'd like to have kids by X, Y, Z. But it's like, we never even talked about getting married.
Yeah.
Is that something that's not important? Is that important?
Yeah, exactly. Is that important to you? How do you want to do it?
Yeah.
It's super. Yeah.
Right?
That stuff is like overlooked. When people say communication is key, communication is key. Uncomfortable communication is key.
Yeah.
Right? Like actually being honest with what you want. And I didn't learn that until later. Like I've had relationships before, and sometimes things would happen I didn't like and I didn't agree with something, but I didn't have the guts to say it.
Yeah.
And then you end up kind of resenting and creating what's called like covert contracts. If I do this, I expect this, but no one really says it.
Yep.
So it's so important in a non-combative way, in sales, in whatever it is, like, hey, this is what I would like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can we work towards that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, after you've presented where both parties are at, then you can actually have a good quality negotiation or a compromise to then hopefully, agree on the terms of sale or agree on the terms of the relationship.
Yeah.
Right. So why I say it's top down, bottom up, if you go through those steps properly, those things actually form the glue of your decision-making process. So, it sounds a bit clinical, but like, let's be realistic. In any relationship, that initial passion in that honeymoon phase that everybody experiences when they first get into a relationship, like, oh, this is fantastic. I love this person, blah, 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 blah. That is not going to hold you together in the tough times.
No.
Right? And so that's why when you go through the top-down, bottom-up process, when you do have those tough times, you go back through your process. Okay, we agreed to, that this was going to be the basis of a relationship because when we talked about it, we both agreed that this was the direction that we wanted to take our lives. We agreed that, this is how many kids we wanted to have or how we wanted to raise our kids, how we'd handle money, all of these difficult questions. And we did that because, when we were dating, we found that we were compatible.
Yeah.
Right? We were compatible because, when we were in that flirting stage, we actually asked each other the right questions and we actually tried to identify, what are the person's interests and do we have some common agreements in terms of what we value in life.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? And then we got to that point because, I met this chick at a party and she looked good and she impressed me, or I really loved the way that she spoke, or she found my humor to be attractive. And so you got this top down, bottom up where it's like you're reinforcing the decisions that you've made.
Yeah.
Right. So that when you go back on it and you reflect on it, you go, these are the reasons why I fell in love with this person. And that's the glue that will actually hold you together when times are tough, you know, and you might be going through something that's a personal thing that, you know, perhaps, you know, you didn't get that promotion that you wanted, or you didn't get what you wanted in terms of money out of business or something like that, or a business deal went south, or you lost a good friend, or all of these things in life that life throws at you. You know, you need to know whether you've got that glue behind you to hold you together with that person and grow together.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things why I'm so passionate about sales, is because I feel like for all those people out there who say, you know, I'm not good at selling, it's like, well, this is actually a life skill that helps you to build solid relationships with people.
Yeah.
So even if it's not for you to be able to sell a product, at least understand the process so that when it comes to negotiating in your relationship, you've got the courage to be able to be open-minded and speak what's on your heart. Because if you never go through that process of presenting figures, that is probably going to be the catalyst for something going majorly wrong with your relationship in the future. Because it's like an unwritten agreement, and then it's like, but you never told me that this was something that was very important to you.
Yeah. It's a covert contract.
Yep.
Yeah. It's like, it's hidden. We never really spoke about it, but it's what I think now. Yeah. I think sales is really important, man. I think I've learned the most from sales. I've even become a better clinician because I've been doing sales. You know, I can investigate more and ask better questions at the right time. And there's a difference, like, in the way that we sell versus how you would sell a car. For us, it's very personal. It's very one-on-one, and it's very much getting to the why. Why do you want to do this in the first place?
Yep.
What happens if you don't?
Yep.
And a lot of the way that I sell is question-based selling. I want you to say it. I don't want to convince you why this is good. I want you to tell me why it's good.
Yeah.
Because it's much more powerful coming from you.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel like you're making the decision rather than me pushing you towards it.
Yeah, that's right.
And then there's no sales resistance afterwards. There's no refunds. There's no buyer's remorse because you made the decision. So I want them to feel empowered from the beginning of the call. And at any point, the thing that frustrates me about people in sales, the thing that I find the most challenging, is when people don't know how to say no and they just ghost you. That really annoys me.
Yeah.
And I've had that a lot. It's like, just say no.
Yep.
Just say, this isn't the right time for me.
Well, they've never had to work on that resilience to be upfront with somebody.
Yeah.
You know,
just say
like
no.
if they're running away from you because you're trying to sell them something, they're probably running away from relationships in life as well.
Yeah.
You know, because of things that, oh, this person did this to me. Okay, I don't want to pull them up on it. I just won't talk to them.
Yeah. But the reason why we would be trying to sell someone something is because you inquired. You put a form through. You went through the process of filling out. We have a very extensive form. And so you went through the process. I'm just trying to see if we can help you. And if you don't want it, just say no.
But there's also an accountability thing, because for the people that you're trying to help, they have to make the diet changes. They have to make a lot of the changes in their life, whether it's exercise, diet, whether it's the medication that they need to take or the supplements that they need to use.
Yeah.
Right? It's not good enough for them to sign up to a program and think that, oh, this is going to magically change my life, but without doing any of the work. Yeah. Right? So you need that commitment from them to make sure that they understand that, hey, you know, this is only the start of your journey.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
I can tell you the things that you need to do or help you to educate you on what are the things that you need to do. But you still need to fucking do them.
Yeah. And I asked them and I say, hey, you know, if you've missed 2 book times and you've rescheduled them, are you going to do this in the program?
Yeah.
Because if that's the case, then you're maybe not a good fit for us. So sometimes, like, it helps when somebody holds you accountable, because raising you to that higher standard is likely what you need. And we get people who have worked with other practitioners that don't even tell them what they want to hear.
Yep.
And I don't do that.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, the reason why you're not getting results is because you haven't actually changed. I've asked you to cut out alcohol 4 weeks ago.
Yep.
I don't give a fuck that it's Christmas.
Yeah.
Like, your Crohn's disease doesn't wait.
Yeah.
You know, I know it sounds like bad, but it's like sometimes at this, you really need to just do this.
Yeah.
Because the next step is not good.
Yeah.
Like, the other option of surgeries and drug therapies is not a good option.
Yeah.
So can you just do this for now? And I will hold you accountable if you want it. But there's no point in paying the money and committing, and if you don't make the changes, just don't start in the first place.
Yeah.
And I say that to a lot of the patients. I say, it's not about you. I don't care that you paid us. It's, I want you to complete the program and be a really good testimonial for us, because we have hundreds of them and I want you to be another one. But if you don't get, because that's what helps my business grow. It's the reputation, it's the results. It's not the money. It's that comes as a secondary thing.
Yeah.
But if I continue to get really good results for people, that's what helps. But I
Yeah.
can't get good results for you if you don't do the thing.
That's right.
So it makes me look bad
Yep.
Even though my protocols
might be right.
Yeah. You're not implementing it.
Yeah.
So let's work together.
Yeah.
Because you said you wanted to get better.
Now you mentioned mentoring. So do you have mentors at the present moment? Do you?
At the present moment, no.
Yep.
But I turn to a lot of different resources. Lately, it's been a lot of sermons, actually. Okay. Anytime I'm feeling like, oh, maybe I have this type of challenge, I'll pull up a sermon, or I have a friend who's a pastor, or talk to them, turn more towards faith. But for a long time, it was more kind of business mentoring. Yeah.
So, okay, let's sort of break that down into its two parts. So from a business mentoring perspective, are there any people that you look up to or that really guide you in terms of from that perspective, like that you found really impactful to you?
Yeah, there's so many. Patrick Bet-David, I think is really good.
Yep.
Start With Why, Simon Sinek. It's a great book.
Yep.
That's one that I've read 2 to 3 times over.
Yep.
Relentless, Tim Grover, another really good one. Eli Wild, who's a very good salesperson, kind of for more on the sales front.
Yep.
Yeah, those will be the more big names that have kind of left more of an impact on me.
Okay. And then what sort of triggered this shift into, looking at it from a faith-based perspective? So
yeah,
I'm sort of curious because generally there would have to be some form of a catalyst. And the reason why I say that is because, one of the things that I commonly say is that most people, they only turn to God, so to speak, when something goes bad in their life.
Yeah.
Or it's either bad in their life or bad in somebody's life that is close to them. And you're reaching out in prayer because you want help.
Yeah, see, nothing bad really happened. Yep. It was more of a realization.
Okay.
It was more of a realization that I was like, oh, wow, God's been working in my life this entire time. I just haven't noticed. I grew up Christian Orthodox and being around Christianity, but I never really practiced it. So and I remember a couple of years ago just sitting there and thinking, like, I actually said it to one of my friends. I was like, I want to know how to get more involved. But the Orthodox community, especially in a different country, like for the diaspora here, it's very difficult for a young person to we don't have Bible study, we don't do things like that. So it's hard. And a few things happened that seemed like a coincidence, but I don't think were. And I ran into a friend who I went to high school with, who's a pastor at a church, and we just started going for walks. And then I went to the church, and since then I've just been more and more involved. And I've realized that God has been working in my life. I just haven't noticed. I look back on a lot of the things that happened, like moving countries and going through all the difficulties. Like, here I am though. Like, I have all these things that I have my health, I have my family, I have my home, it's like that didn't happen by chance. It's not because you're so talented and smart. It's because God was working in my life the entire time. I just didn't realize. So it was more of a realization rather than something bad happening. And now the purpose is different. The purpose is like, how can I just meet my needs comfortably, and then from that serve other people rather than just all of it being about me. So my purpose is now, whereas before, fighting MMA was about me. How do I get the recognition and the championships and the accolades, and it's me. Even business early days was, how do I make more money so that I can have X, Y, and Z. Now it's not about that. It's like, how can I impact more people so that I can serve more?
Yeah.
So it's really helped me mature a different path.
So, okay, out of curiosity, so when you were young, did you go to church, like Orthodox church and things like that when you were young?
Yeah.
And so from that Orthodox perspective, there's obviously it feels like there's a lot of rites and rituals.
Yeah. And even like when you go to a church on a Sunday and you listen to the priest, it's difficult to understand. Like, they'll speak in a different language, and you're not really getting it. You're just there for the ceremony as a kid. You don't really understand what they're saying. So I found it really difficult to connect because I was like, I don't know what's going on. And it wasn't until I kind of started reading the Bible and reading passages and understanding the books, and it's like, oh, wow, okay. All the answers that I've been looking for are already here. I just haven't looked.
Yeah.
And I find a lot of societies like that. It's like all these questions about what's the meaning of life, or what do I do about this, or it's already there. You just have to look.
That's interesting because, you know, I think everybody still debates what is the meaning of life.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, the meaning of life is probably a bad example, but like, what do I do when I'm going through pressure? You know, what do I do when I'm going through pain? What do I do when this happens? What do I just look like? What does a marriage mean? You know, when is it okay to get a divorce? The answers are there. It's just no one looks.
Yeah. It's interesting. You know, I always say faith is one of those journeys that it's an individual's journey.
Yeah.
It's almost like a Brazilian
Yeah.
you know, jiu-jitsu belt, right? Like there are black belts out there that, you know, have never competed in their life, and then there are, you know, international competitors at, you know, the blue belt and purple belt level that you know, would probably qualify as a black belt in some eyes.
Yeah.
But, you know, because they're competitors, they're competing on the world stage, it's got to be taken at a different pace.
Correct.
You know, but it's very much, you know, what does that belt actually mean to the individual? You know, some people are really focused on, I like that idea of, you know, achieving my goals and getting a belt. Some people are more like, it doesn't really matter. Like I'm probably more on that, you know, it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, when you roll with somebody, they're going to know how good you are anyway.
Yeah.
So
Correct.
if anything, like, you know, people can be misled by the belt because they go, oh, this guy's only this or that, or they go, oh, this person's a black belt, and then you roll with them and then you go, okay, that was interesting.
For us, used to say, and he hasn't given out many black belts.
Yeah.
He used to say, he goes, I never want to give my student a belt they can't carry.
Yeah.
Because if they go to a different gym as a black belt, and I never want them to feel out of place.
Yeah.
And I like that.
Yeah.
Because I think now, like, there are some black belts who I've rolled with that I'm like,
yeah,
I don't know. It's like, it's not, no disrespect to them, but it's like, you just don't understand the sport. Yeah. I don't think you're a black belt yet.
Well, it's also, if you're doing the right things, it's only a matter of when, not if.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
yeah.
You know, you got to actually enjoy whatever belt you've got because, you know, you got a limited time window. You know, and when I say limited time window, for some people it's like, you know, you might spend, you know, 5 years as a white belt or 5 years as a blue belt or 5 years as a purple belt. Like, doesn't matter. Just enjoy it because, you know, if you keep turning up, eventually one day it's going to change anyway. You're going to have an extra stripe or an extra belt or a different colored belt or whatever the case may be. So it's only a matter of time. It's just, you know, I think it's, and especially, I think it's the MMA side of me that is more influenced by that because, you know, there's no belts in MMA.
Yeah.
You know, you're either better than the other guy on the night or you're not.
You're not. Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, you're either going to win that fight or you don't. And you win or you lose, like, it doesn't really matter anyway. Yeah. Like, you only really lost when you've just given it up and you don't go back to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's when it's like, okay, well, that, you know, when people close that chapter of their life, it can be quite sad, you know, like obviously if it's been their livelihood and their career, but at the same time, like there are times when you have to move on from competitive life, right?
Yeah.
But you know, you can still, it doesn't mean you stop training, right? Like there are plenty of guys that, you know, like GSP, you know, who continue to train because martial arts is a way of life, and that's the way I view it, right?
Dude,
like
he could still fight.
Yeah.
I just remember seeing him. I'm like, wow, this guy could still fight.
Yeah.
He would turn up like twice a day to the hardest classes.
Yep.
And he doesn't have to.
But that's the distinction between a martial artist and a fighter.
Yeah. Correct.
You know? So I would never call myself a fighter because for me, I'd say I'm a martial artist because irrespective of whether I'm fighting or not, I'm going to be training.
Correct. Yeah.
Whereas a fighter is like anybody that goes and does competition. You go into a jiu-jitsu competition, you go into a boxing match, kickboxing match, an MMA match, you can be a fighter.
Yeah.
Right? But, you know, you can't be a fighter forever.
I know plenty of fighters who aren't martial artists. Like going to boxing gyms as a kid, like boxing gyms is where you find guys who can fight, but don't live the martial arts way of life. And when they finish fighting, now they're drinking and partying and that's not a martial artist. You know, whereas you can have the opposite where you have someone like GSP who's constantly improving, the whole goal of martial arts is just constant self-improvement. It's refining in every area of your life. Whether that's like temperance or mood or character or physical abilities or skill, like you should be trying to improve in every way. So yeah, being a fighter is one thing, being a martial artist is completely different. So I think for me as well, it was, even though my competing days are, maybe I'll compete someday, but like for now, it's not really a priority of me. It doesn't drive me. It used to. Now I'm like, I don't know. I'd rather just get really good. I want to go to the gym, roll and try this thing that I've been thinking about or really refine like my mount or really refine my triangles from the bottom. And that's what inspires me now. Like it's just constantly trying to perfect it. Yeah. Whereas winning a tournament doesn't drive me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I'm on this thing this year where it's like majority of my my work has been positional work. Because I just want to, like, I think, a lot of times in roles, we waste a lot of time just getting to a position, like whether it's like, and like, I think, there is a time and place to work on those things. But, if I spend, 4 minutes out of the 5 minute role just working to get to, say, half guard, right, I'm going to get less reps in if I'm trying to improve my half guard. Then if we just started in half guard and let's just work the reps there, I could probably get 10 or 20 reps in.
Correct.
Versus, getting 1 rep in because we spent most of it working on guard retention. Right? So, it depends on what your purpose is. But if your purpose is guard retention, then just play guard. And as soon as you get to something, then, you just reset the position and get more reps in. So,
I think people underestimate how much they can get done in an hour of training. Like, let's talk class structure a little bit. Because when I went to Tristar, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, it's so efficient and you can get so much done.
So, okay, let's talk about that, right? So, I guess for people that don't train any jiu-jitsu, so to speak, so a typical jiu-jitsu class structure would be like a 10 to 15 minute warm-up. And this is, I'm talking like a classical example here. So then, they do some form of a technique for another 15 minutes and then you might roll for half an hour. What was the structure like at Tristar?
So the classes were split. There was fundamentals and there was everyone else. And fundamentals, you go through a 12-week program where you learn basics. You learn, hip escape, mount, all that sort of stuff. But for the rest of the class, like let's say it was like 2-stripe white belt and above or blue belt and above, you get to class and if class starts at 7, you should already be warm. Like if you want to come in and do a warm-up, that's on you. 7 o'clock, class starts, we go straight into technique. The first technique was usually some type of takedown and then it would advance into a positional transition and then into a submission. It almost always finished with a sub. So it was a sequence. And that would go for about 30 minutes and you were doing ropes. Like it wasn't like, just learn it. It was drill. And if you're not drilling, everyone else can tell because everyone else is drilling. Like, what are you doing? So I remember like for about 8 weeks, like I was drilling with Rory because he was getting ready to fight Neiman Gracie and he was like, just drill. And by the time the roll comes, you're tired. You're like, wow, we actually drilled. Like I really learnt that technique. And then he would repeat that technique Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and add layers onto it. And sometimes you might do it for an entire month.
Wow.
Like that particular guillotine or sequence. And so you really got to understand it. And so that would be the technique aspect of it. And then the role was you pick your rounds prior to, in the pro class especially, you would pick your rounds prior to starting.
Oh, wow.
So like you're round 1, you're round 2, you're 3, you're 4, you're 5. And the in-between break, we don't waste time, we just find each other. And I learnt the hard way. I'm like, one of the rounds I went with someone else and the guy came back afterwards like, hey dude, like you told me I'm round 3. It's like, fuck, that was really important. So there's no time wasting. There's no, as soon as you finish your round, you find your partner, you go. 5 minute rounds. After you finished rolling 5 5s, then you go wrestle if you want. And because now you're warm and you're really, really warm and you can go into a separate room and just wrestle and start from a standing position. Or work on like starting from single legs or from half guard or whatever specific thing you wanted to do. And classes would go, then you'd finish about 30 minutes later, hour and a half. And then after that, it would be a 15-minute circuit for conditioning. So a session would last like an hour and a half, 2 hours, but you'd got the amount of volume you'd get done and reps would be the equivalent of someone doing like 3 days. So it was very efficient. There was no time wasting. And I like that. I like going straight into technique, starting from a specific position and layering that day by day. Like I don't want to do half guard on a Monday and, triangles from bottom on a Wednesday. It makes no sense. I would want to do like single leg takedown to half guard to pass to mount to finish. That would make sense as a sequence. And I think if you can repeat that over and over again and look at the details, people learn a lot better.
It's interesting. I think, how to develop, athletes in the fastest way possible is something that, a lot of the highest level coaches are all thinking about now. And, there is no, I wouldn't say there's right and wrong, but there's better ways and there's worse ways. Right. And it all depends on the culture that you've also built inside your gym, One of the things I'm really fortunate to be able to do is go and visit lots of places just because, I do the podcast and I do fight content and I'm at the fight. So I know a lot of the amateur guys that come through the ranks. And then, as I go and talk to people, like I usually try and tee it up so that if they have a session on, I'll try and join in the session. So then at least I see, how they work and all that sort of stuff. And it helps me, it's one of those things that when you train with somebody, you actually you're gaining insight into that person's personality. And I think a lot of people wouldn't see it, but,
I can pick up on it really quickly, you know, when I watch people spar. You know, if they're sparring MMA, you can see the people that shy away from adversity, you know, and you can see the people that really love, you know, some people say they really love violence. Like I get people that say that about me, but it's like, no, you're just comfortable to face adversity.
Yeah.
Right. And you don't shy away from it. Like, you know, of course there's stupid ways to do that and there's smart ways to do that. But you know, you really get to see people's personalities. You get to see people who, you know, will turn it up on people that they know they can beat, but then shy away from the people that they can't. Yeah. Right. And you sort of know, okay, this, not to say they're a bully, but you know, they're being selective about who they try and dial it up with. Right. Yeah. So you really learn a lot about people's mindsets and some of those things. But I just want to bring it back to Faye for a second because, you know, Firas is really big on philosophy. Did you ever have a chat with him about?
Yeah, dude, all the time. Yeah. After class, like that's all we do. We sit around and talk about philosophy and world politics and whatever the hell, feminism. Like he's a funny dude. But there was a coach, I don't know if you know Master Peter. Rest in peace, Master Peter. He was like the Muay Thai coach of the gym. He was old school. He was like the guy, like full respect. He taught for us and everyone. He was like this old time man who's massive character. Like if you guys want to like watch who he is, just type in like Muay Thai Master on YouTube and hilarious videos. But he would say to everyone, he's like, this guy's, he'd call it philosophy. Like for us is philosophy because like brainwashes everyone. Yeah. But he's, we talk about philosophy a lot. Yeah.
Did he ever, because for us is a Muslim, so he obviously believes, you know, in God. Yeah. Did you ever start, you know, getting interested to read the Quran and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a lot of Muslim friends and I have a huge respect for like Muslim. The way I see it, I'm like, if you have a religion to guide you, it's better than having nothing guide you. Even though it might be a different religion from mine, it's actually more similar than it is different. Like in terms of how they live their life and the values of family and friendship and all of that stuff. But he did talk about a few things. I remember we had dinner once and he was talking about the idea that the Muslim religion doesn't respect women. He was like, the Western countries have propagated this idea that we don't respect women and we, you know, they're like second-class citizens in our religion. He goes, but it's the complete opposite. Yeah. He goes, in the Quran, it says, you know, the most important person on earth is the mother, not necessarily the woman, but the mother, the one who bears life and like bears children and contributes to our society. And so it was like he would say a few things, and like sometimes we talk about just culture in general. And Canada's very, especially Montreal, very liberal, very left. And he would obviously have his 2 cents about that, and you can watch his podcast. He talks about it all the time. But we did talk about religion at times. Yeah.
So how does that then influence your own thoughts in terms of, you know, your relationship with God?
What do you mean?
So I guess, you know, I feel, and one of the reasons why I like talking about, you know, religion and faith is because it is an individual's journey. You sort of, I like to sort of gain insight from people as to what informs that insight. You know, for some people it could be like, you know, how did you come to the idea that there is a God? Right? Because for some people they struggle with the idea that, you know, is there a God? Isn't there a God? You know, I've had plenty of conversations where people are like, oh, you know, I don't believe that there is a God per se, you know, because, and, you know, their reasonings could be something simple like, well, if there was a God, then why is there suffering? Yeah. Right. And I'm always very curious as to understand, you know, how did they come to that conclusion? Because we could have two people go through a very similar set of circumstances, but come to two totally different conclusions in terms of, you know, what they believe. So I always find this to be a very interesting topic because, you know, I guess for me, and I won't go through the full story, but, you know, people that listen to the podcast obviously know I love talking about my experience on mescaline, which is like a drug from a cactus. And I went on a bit of a spiritual journey and that, you know, led me to believe, yes, there is a God. Yep. But I guess, you know, for you, you know, how did you, like, I guess what informs your belief that there is a God?
Yeah, so I had a similar journey. Okay. Where I kind of saw God. Yep. But people listening though, it's crazy. But
on psychedelics or
on a drug. It was just marijuana actually. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know what happened that particular day, or the particular night. But yeah, I did have that kind of vision. But even before that, it was again more of a realization. I'm like, I've actually been extremely fortunate, and it feels like there is somebody watching my back. Like it feels like there is somebody with me, because I haven't done this all on my own, and I haven't gone through the hardships and the sicknesses in the family all on my own. There has to be something. There has to be a God, because it makes no sense otherwise. Like it's not just luck.
Well, I guess to play devil's advocate, right? Like, wouldn't there be somebody out there that says, okay, you might feel that way.
Yep.
But there might be somebody in a less fortunate position.
Yep.
Did they just not have God walk with them then?
It depends. I was listening to a sermon by Rick Warren yesterday, and he was saying how God plays a part in your life's problems. Like if you have problems, and one of the ways is he just completely pulls you out of it, which is really nice when that happens. But another way is he'll present you with one problem to help you realize a bigger problem. And he's always in your life, guiding you in a direction. It's just not always how you want it to be. So I would argue that it depends what your circumstances are. And I bet somewhere, if you look far enough and if you're open to it, you will be able to see that God's working.
Yep.
But that's for everyone's personal opinion. And also you have to just choose. Like at some point, I'm sure we've all questioned, like, is there a God? But I choose to believe that there is, because I live my life better that way.
Yeah, it's interesting when you were saying that, you made me think back to part of the reason why I started this podcast. I had a friend commit suicide.
Yep.
And that was back in 2019. So just after Easter, we actually caught up. We had dinner, my family, my friend Ivan's family and him. And, it just felt like, because we were all high school mates, like it was just like normal. Like everything was like old times. We talked about all the stupid shit we did in high school and, just reminisced and had a lot of fun. And then, 5 days later, I find out that he's jumped in front of a train and killed himself. Right. And you just, it makes you question a lot of things. Right. But then for him, he was, I wouldn't say he was religious in high school. Definitely not, but at some point, he was going to church and, from what I understood, he believed in God, which is interesting in itself because, if you, generally, if you have this belief in God, like I think, suicide's one of the things that is generally frowned upon. But, for whatever, was troubling him at that point in time, I do take some solace in the idea that, he's probably, at peace now. But I guess, looking at it from my perspective and, as a friend, seeing, having a friend that has gone through this really difficult time and suffering and, sacrificed his life for it, that then, gave birth to me, thinking about a lot of things in a different context, that there is this finiteness to life that, that everything, it ends.
Yep.
Right. And that, in 100 years' time, all of us will be forgotten. There'll be a new generation, in 1,000 years' time, totally different, in 10,000 years' time, totally different, right? And then, it even made me think, when it comes to your own circumstances and your own life, the fact that you exist today is a miracle.
Yep.
You've got two parents. Those two parents have two parents each. That's 4.
Yeah.
Then you go to 16, then you go to 32, and you keep going and keep going and keep going. And you go, how possibly long is the chain for you to exist in this world?
Yeah.
How many lives is that? How many people's blood is flowing through your veins so that you can exist today?
Yeah.
And to me, that's nothing short of a miracle because, like, if you think back and even if you just say, let's just go 2,000 years to the birth of Christ, right? Well, how many people is that already?
Yeah.
That's a lot of people
for
you to exist. And then to believe that, okay, well, obviously there was life before then, right? And we go back into the BC years. How far do we go for you to exist today, for you to have this consciousness that you can think about these things, experience life in the current world today as you, what are the chances?
Yeah.
Right? You could be almost anyone in the world.
Yeah.
But you're you, right? And you have this experience and you live this life that for what though?
Yeah.
Right?
How special is it?
Yeah. But if you don't, like, I think in life, everybody just focuses on the what, when, and how. What do I do for work, or what do you do for work? How do you make a living? How do you survive?
And when, at what time in your life, or when in your life did you do this or have children? And you think about the what, when, and how, the very materialistic things. We don't think about the why.
Yeah.
And that's the crazy question.
Yeah.
You know, like why, right? And for some, you know, maybe they go, okay, well, maybe life is meaningless.
Yeah.
But then what are your options?
Why would I want to live that way?
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
And then even you said earlier, like, sorry to hear about your friend. I had a Taekwondo instructor when I was young also commit suicide. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. You just don't understand why, but you know, it's mental health and is a serious thing, and sometimes very, very overlooked, especially in men. I find because men tend to commit more suicide than women.
Females,
but the people who would ask, you know, how can God exist if so much bad happens in the world? Well, the thing is, he never promised that life would be without pain. He said heaven would be. You know, like heaven would be no pain, no suffering, but not life. So unfortunately, that's what we've been given, right? And it's whatever happens, and it's what are you going to do with that now? Are you going to turn pain into purpose? Pastor Rick Warren, like the guy that I was listening to, his son committed suicide. And at that time, he was at the height of his career, and he's the most well-known pastor in the US, and his son committed suicide. So you can imagine all the, like, you know, questioning and the grilling that he received, but he had a choice. He's like, do I turn it into purpose? Like, what do I do with this? How does this make sense?
Yep.
And he did. And he has mental health foundations and helps people and continues his sermons and all of that stuff. But you get dealt a hand, and then you get given a choice.
I love that. I think that's a great way to wrap this up. You know, turn pain into purpose.
Yeah.
I really like that statement. I'm going to think more on that. And no doubt I'm going to talk about it in the future. But for people that want to find you, how do they find you?
Instagram, Marko's Daily Dose, Marko with a K. Facebook, Marko Papuckovski. There's not many. You'll find me. And then the business website is humanliwellness.com, HUMANLI. If you guys want to inquire, either shoot me a message, fill out a form, and I'll get in touch with you. If you're from the podcast, mention in the form that you're from the podcast, and I'll call you. Yep. Make sure that it's me. So yeah, that'll be cool.
All right, cool. Thanks everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thanks, man.